Step into Willow Manor, where a shocking murder unveils a web of deadly secrets. When lawyer Harold Vance is poisoned, Miss Jane Marple unravels a chilling plot tied to a hidden codicil, a lost locket, and a rose garden's cryptic note. As cyanide strikes again targeting heiress Sylvia, Marple discovers Sylvia's true parentage, daughter of Clara, a vanished wife living in hiding. Greedy cousin Roland kills to steal the estate, but a threatening letter reveals his accomplice. Lurking in the family. With sharp eyes and quiet traps, Marple exposes betrayal, reunites a mother and daughter, and restores peace, proving no secret stays buried in this gripping Agatha Christie-style mystery. Chapter 1. Arrival at Willow Manor. The train chugged along, puffing clouds of white steam into the crisp autumn air. Miss Jane Marple sat by the window, her small hands folded neatly over her black handbag. She wore her usual tweed skirt, a soft, pink cardigan, and a hat with a single feather that bobbed gently with the train's sway. Her eyes, sharp and bright despite her age, watched the green hills of the English countryside roll by. The village of St. Mary Mead, her home, was far behind now, and she was on her way to Willow Manor, a grand old house tucked in a quiet corner of the county. Miss Marple didn't travel much these days. Her cozy cottage, with its rose bushes and tidy garden, suited her just fine. But when her old friend Lady Eleanor Grayson sent a letter begging her to visit, she couldn't say no. Eleanor's words had been warm but hurried, with a hint of worry between the lines. "Come for a rest, dear Jane," the letter said. "The manor is peaceful, and I'd love your company." Miss Marple, who had a knack for spotting trouble in even the politest words, sensed something was off. People didn't write like that unless they were hiding something or scared. The train slowed, and the conductor's voice called out, "Willowford Station." Miss Marple gathered her things, a small suitcase, her knitting bag, and an umbrella, just in case. She stepped onto the platform, where the air smelled of damp leaves and coal smoke. A young man in a tweed cap, probably the manor's driver, waited by a shiny black car. "Miss Marple?" he asked, tipping his cap. She nodded, and he took her suitcase, leading her to the car. "Name's Tom," he said. "Lady Eleanor's expecting you." The drive to Willow Manor was short but bumpy, along a winding road, lined with tall oaks. Their leaves, gold and red, fluttered down like confetti. Miss Marple watched the trees, her mind already turning. She had a habit of noticing things, small things, like the way a person's smile didn't reach their eyes, or how a quick glance could hide a secret. In St. Mary Mead, she'd solved many a puzzle just by watching and listening. People, she often thought, were the same everywhere, whether in a village or a grand manor, and trouble, she knew, followed them like a shadow. Willow Manor came into view as the car crested a hill. It was a sprawling stone house with ivy climbing its walls and tall chimneys poking into the sky. The windows gleamed in the late afternoon sun, but the place had a stillness that made Miss Marple's neck prickle. It was too quiet, like a house holding its breath. Tom pulled up to the front steps, where a heavy oak door stood open. A woman, in a gray dress, her hair pinned tightly, hurried out to meet them. "Miss Marple." "Oh, I'm so glad you're here." It was Lady Eleanor Grayson, her face pale but smiling. She was tall and thin, with silver hair and kind eyes that darted nervously. "You must be tired from the journey. Come in, come in." She took Miss Marple's arm, guiding her inside as Tom carried the suitcase. The entrance hall was grand, with a polished marble floor and a chandelier that sparkled like stars. A wide staircase curved up to the second floor, and portraits of stern-looking people in old-fashioned clothes lined the walls. Miss Marple's sharp eyes took it all in. The faint dust on the picture frames, the worn edge of the rug, the way Eleanor's hands twisted together. Small signs, but they told a story. The manor was beautiful, but it wasn't happy. "Let me show you to your room," Eleanor said, leading the way up the stairs. "I've put you in the blue room. It's cozy, with a lovely view of the garden." Her voice was bright, but Miss Marple caught the strain in it, like a violin string pulled too tight. They walked down a long hallway, past closed doors and faded wallpaper. The air smelled of old wood and lavender, but there was something else too, a faint, sour tang Miss Marple couldn't quite place. The blue room was indeed cozy, with a Soft bed covered in a quilt, a small fireplace, and a window overlooking a garden of roses and hedges. Miss Marple set her handbag on a chair and smiled at Eleanor. "It's perfect, dear," she said. "Now tell me, how are you? And the family?" Eleanor's smile faltered. "Oh, we're fine. Charles is here, of course, my son. And Beatrice, his wife. Sylvia, my niece, arrived last week, and Roland, my cousin, has been staying with us. It's a full house." She laughed, but it sounded forced. Miss Marple nodded, her face gentle but her mind sharp. A full house, she thought. Often meant a house full of secrets. "Will I meet them at dinner?" Miss Marple asked, unpacking her knitting from her bag. The click of her needles always helped her think. Yes, dinner's at 7, Eleanor said. "You'll like them, I'm sure. They're family." She hesitated, then added, "I'm so glad you're here, Jane. It's been a bit tense lately. Nothing serious, just family nonsense. You know how it is." Miss Marple did know. In St. Mary Mead, family nonsense often meant arguments over money, old grudges, or hidden loves. She patted Eleanor's hand. "I'm sure. It's nothing a good cup of tea can't fix," she said, her eyes twinkling. But inside she was already watching, already listening. Eleanor left to let Miss Marple rest, and the old lady sat by the window, her knitting in her lap. The garden below was neat, with rows of red and yellow roses, but one corner looked wild, overgrown with thorny bushes. She made a mental note of it. Gardens, like people, often hid their secrets in plain sight. At 7, Miss Marple made her way downstairs, her black shoes tapping softly on the wood floor. The dining room was as grand as the hall, with a long table set with silver and crystal. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows on the walls. The family was already there, and Miss Marple took her seat, her eyes moving from face to face. Charles, Grayson, Eleanor's son, was a tall man in his 40s with dark hair and a stiff smile. His suit was well tailored, but his tie was crooked and his fingers drummed on the table. Nervous, Miss Marple thought, or impatient. Next to him sat Beatrice, his wife, a pretty woman with sharp green eyes and a tight mouth. She wore a red dress that seemed too bright for the somber room. Sylvia, the niece, was younger, maybe 25, with soft brown curls and a shy smile. She kept her eyes on her plate, as if afraid to look up. Roland, the cousin, was older, with a red face and a loud laugh that didn't match his cold eyes. He talked too much, Miss Marple noted, like someone trying to hide something. Eleanor introduced her. "This is my dear friend, Miss Jane Marple from St. Mary Mead. She's come for a little holiday." The family murmured hellos, but their smiles were thin. Miss Marple nodded politely, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't say much, but she watched everything. The way Charles glanced at Beatrice, the way Sylvia's fork trembled, the way Roland's laugh stopped too suddenly. Dinner was served. Roast lamb, potatoes and green beans, with a rich gravy. That smelled divine. Miss Marple ate slowly, listening as the family talked. Charles complained about the Manor's upkeep, saying it cost a fortune. Beatrice snapped that he should sell it then, and move to London. Sylvia said nothing, but her eyes flicked to Eleanor, who looked tired. Roland told a story about a hunting trip, his voice too loud, his hands waving. Miss Marple smiled and nodded, but her mind was busy. She remembered a family in St. Mary Mead, the Browns, who argued like this before old Mr. Brown was found dead in his shed. Money, she thought, was often at the root of such quarrels. As the meal ended, the front doorbell rang, loud and sharp. Everyone froze. Eleanor's face went pale. "Who could that be?" she whispered. Tom, the driver, appeared at the door. "It's a Mr. Harold Vance, ma'am," he said. "Says he's a solicitor. Wants to see you urgently." Eleanor stood, her napkin falling to the floor. A solicitor at this hour? She looked at Miss Marple, her eyes wide with worry. Miss Marple's face stayed calm, but her heart gave a little jump. Solicitors didn't visit late unless something was wrong. Very wrong. "Show him in," Eleanor said, her voice shaky. The family exchanged glances. and Miss Marple leaned back in her chair, her knitting needles clicking softly in her mind, even if her hands were still. Trouble, she thought, had just walked through the door. Harold Vance entered, a thin man with a sharp nose and a briefcase clutched tightly in his hand. His suit was gray, his tie plain, but his eyes were bright, almost feverish. "Lady Grayson," he said, bowing slightly. "I'm sorry to come so late, but it's urgent. It's about Sir Reginald's will." The name hit the room like a stone, through glass. Charles's fork clattered to his plate. Beatrice's lips parted in a silent gasp. Sylvia's hands twisted in her lap, and Roland's face turned even redder. Eleanor swayed, gripping the table. "Reginald's will?" she said, faintly, "but he's been gone a month." Vance nodded. "Yes, but there's new information. I must speak with the family. Tonight, if possible." He glanced around, his eyes pausing on Miss Marple, who looked like a harmless old lady but felt his gaze, like a spotlight. She smiled sweetly, her eyes mild, but her mind was racing. Sir Reginald Grayson, Eleanor's late husband, had been a wealthy man, and wills, she knew, often brought out the worst in people. Eleanor nodded slowly. "Very well. We'll meet in the library after dinner." She turned to Miss Marple, her voice pleading. "Jane, will you join us? You're so sensible." "Of course, dear," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but her thoughts sharp. Sensible, she thought, was one way to put it. In St. Mary Mead, sensible meant seeing through lies and spotting the truth in a glance. She had a feeling she'd need all her senses tonight. The family rose, their chairs scraping the floor. Vance excused himself to wait in the library, and the others scattered, their faces tight with worry or anger. Miss Marple stayed seated for a moment, her eyes on the empty doorway. The manor was quiet again, but it was the kind of quiet that hid a storm. She thought of St. Mary Mead, of the time Mrs. Carter's will caused a feud that ended in a stolen diamond and a broken heart. Wills, she knew, were never just about money. They were about secrets, grudges, and sometimes murder. She stood, smoothing her skirt, and made her way to the library. Her steps were slow, her face calm, but her mind was alive, piecing together the looks, the words, the silences. Willow Manor, she thought, was no different from her village. People were people, and trouble was trouble, and Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and quiet ways, was ready to meet it head-on. Chapter 2. The Unexpected Guest. The library at Willow Manor was a grand room, with tall shelves stuffed with dusty books and a fireplace that sent flickering shadows across the walls. Miss Jane Marple stepped inside, her black shoes soft on the thick rug. The air smelled of old leather and wood polish, but there was a chill that made her pull her cardigan tighter. She took a seat in a high-backed chair near the fire, her small handbag on her lap, her eyes sharp despite the dim light. The family was already there, their faces tight, their voices low. Harold Vance, the solicitor, stood by a heavy oak table, his briefcase open, papers spread out like a map of secrets. Miss Marple watched them all, her hands still but her mind busy. Lady Eleanor Grayson sat at the head of the table, her silver hair catching the firelight. She looked tired, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. Charles, her son, leaned against a bookshelf, his arms crossed, his dark eyes fixed on Vance. Beatrice, his wife, sat stiffly, her red dress bright against the dark wood. Her lips were pressed thin like she was holding back a storm. Sylvia, the niece, perched on a stool, her brown curls falling over her face as she stared at the floor. Roland, the cousin, paced near the window, his red face redder now, his loud voice silent for once. Miss Marple noted it all, their looks, their movements, the way the room felt like a pot about to boil over. "Thank you for joining me," Vance said, his voice sharp like a knife. He was a thin man, with a long nose and eyes that darted too, fast. His gray suit was neat, but his tie was loose and his hands shook slightly as he sorted his papers. "I know it's late, but this can't wait. It's about Sir Reginald Grayson's will." The name hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor's handkerchief stopped twisting. Charles's arms tightened. Beatrice's eyes flashed. Sylvia's head snapped up, and Roland stopped pacing, his boots heavy on the rug. Miss Marple's face stayed calm, but her heart gave a little jump. Wills, she knew from St. Mary Mead, were like matches in a dry field. One spark, and everything burned. Vance cleared his throat. Sir Reginald, as you know, passed away a month ago. His will was thought to be settled, but new documents have come to light. I've been tasked with sharing them. He pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase, sealed with red wax. The Grayson family crest, a lion and a rose, was pressed into it. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her eyes on the seal. In her village, a sealed letter once hid a confession of theft. She wondered what this one hid. Why now? Charles snapped, his voice loud in the quiet room. Father's been gone weeks. What's so urgent you come barging in at night? Vance didn't flinch. These papers were found in a safe at Sir Reginald's London office. They change everything. He broke the seal, pulling out a single sheet of paper, yellowed at the edges. This is a codicil, a change to the original will. It was written a year ago, signed and witnessed. Beatrice leaned forward, her green eyes narrow. Change? What kind of change? Her voice was sharp, like she was ready to argue. Miss Marple watched her, remembering a woman in St. Mary Mead who fought over a will and ended up with nothing but shame. Vance held up the paper. I won't read it all tonight. It's long, and I need to verify details. But I can say this. The estate, including Willow Manor and its lands, may not go to who you expect. He looked around, his eyes pausing on each face. There's a condition tied to a family secret, one Sir Reginald kept for years. A secret? Roland barked, his voice loud again. What nonsense is this? Reginald was an open book, but his eyes were cold, and his hands clenched into fists. Miss Marple noted it, her mind flicking to a St. Mary Mead farmer who lied about his debts until they buried him. Eleanor's face went paler. What secret, Mr. Vance? Please tell us. Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple felt a pang of pity. Eleanor was kind, but kindness often hid pain, she knew. Vance shook his head. I can't say more until I've checked the witnesses. Signatures, it's delicate. I'll stay the night if you'll allow, and we'll meet again tomorrow. He snapped his briefcase shut, the sound sharp like a gunshot. Charles stepped forward, his face dark. Stay? Here? After dropping this bomb? He turned to Eleanor. Mother, this is ridiculous. Send him away. Charles, please, Eleanor said, her voice soft but firm. He's doing his job. We'll hear him out tomorrow. She looked at Vance. You're welcome to stay, Mr. Vance. Tom will show you to a room. Vance nodded, his face unreadable. Thank you, Lady Grayson. I'll need to speak with each of you privately tomorrow, too, to clarify things. He picked up his briefcase and followed Tom out, leaving the family in stunned silence. Miss Marple stayed quiet, her eyes moving from face to face. Charles's anger was like a fire, hot and quick. Beatrice's silence felt like a trap, ready to snap. Sylvia's hands shook as she tucked a curl behind her ear, and Roland's pacing started again, faster now. Eleanor looked at Miss Marple, her eyes pleading. Jane, what do you make of this? She whispered. Miss Marple smiled, her face gentle. It's too early to say, dear. But people often hide things, even from themselves. We'll see what tomorrow brings. Inside, her mind was spinning. A codicil, a secret, a late-night visit. She'd seen this before in St. Mary Mead when a will sparked a theft that led to worse. She'd watch, she'd listen, and she'd knit the pieces together. The family left the library one by one there, footsteps echoing in the hall. Miss Marple stayed a moment, her eyes on the fireplace. A log cracked, sending sparks up the chimney. She thought of the rose garden outside, wild in one corner, and the sour smell in the hall earlier. Small things, but they mattered. In her village, a broken fence once led her to a liar. She wondered what the manor's secrets would reveal. She stood, her handbag light in her hand, and made her way to the blue room. The manor was quiet now, but it was the quiet before a storm, she knew. She locked her door, sat by the window, and took out her knitting. The needles clicked softly, a steady rhythm that matched her thoughts. Click, 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 each stitch a step closer to the truth. The night was dark, the garden below a shadow of roses and thorns. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the wild corner where the bushes grew thick. Something about it nagged at her like a name she couldn't recall. She set her knitting down and opened her window, letting the cool air in. The sour smell was stronger now, faint but sharp, like almonds gone bad. Her heart skipped. Almonds, she thought, could mean more than a spoiled nut. In St. Mary Mead, a woman once hid poison in a cake. Miss Marple closed the window, her face calm but her mind racing. She climbed into bed, her small frame sinking into the quilt. The manor creaked. Around her, old wood settling, or perhaps something else moving in the dark. She didn't sleep right away. Her eyes stayed open, staring at the ceiling, her mind turning over the faces, the words, the codicil. Harold Vance's visit was no accident, she thought. Someone wanted that will found, or hidden, and someone she feared might do anything to keep it secret. The clock struck midnight, its chime soft but clear. Miss Marple closed her eyes, but her mind didn't rest. She saw Charles's anger, Beatrice's sharp eyes, Sylvia's trembling hands, Roland's loud lies, and Eleanor, poor Eleanor, caught in the middle. The manor held a secret, and Miss Marple, with her quiet ways and sharp eyes, was already unraveling it, one stitch at a time. Chapter 3. A Death in the Night. The clock in the blue room ticked softly, its hands creeping past midnight. Miss Jane Marple lay awake, her small frame tucked under the quilt, her sharp eyes fixed on the ceiling. The manor was quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that made her ears strain for every creak, every whisper. Her knitting lay on the bedside table, needles still, but her mind was busy, stitching together the evening's events. Harold Vance's sudden arrival, the codicil, the family's tight faces. In St. Mary Mead, she'd learned that secrets, like weeds, grew fastest in the dark, and Willow Manor, she sensed, was full of them. A faint thud came from somewhere in the house, like a door closing too hard. Miss Marple sat up, her heart quick, but steady. She slipped on her dressing gown, soft pink and worn at the elbows, and padded to the door. She opened it a crack, peering into the dim hallway. The air was cool, carrying that sour, almond-like smell she'd noticed earlier. It was stronger now, sharp enough to make her nose wrinkle. She closed the door, locked it, and stood still, thinking. Almonds, she knew, could mean cyanide. In her village, a gardener once used it for rats, and once, she feared, for more than that. She returned to bed but didn't sleep. Her mind turned over the family's faces, Charles's anger, Beatrice's sharp eyes, Sylvia's trembling hands, Roland's loud voice that hid something colder, and Eleanor, poor Eleanor, whose worry seemed to weigh her down. Harold Vance's codicil was the key, Miss Marple thought. It had stirred the pot and someone didn't like the taste. She closed her eyes, but her thoughts kept spinning, like her knitting needles on a long scarf. A scream shattered the silence, high and sharp, cutting through the manor. Miss Marple's eyes snapped open. It came from downstairs, maybe the east wing where the guest rooms were. She was out of bed in a moment, her slippers on, her handbag clutched tight. She unlocked her door and stepped into the hall, where lights were flickering on. Footsteps thumped below and voices rose. Eleanor's panicked and Charles's loud and angry. Miss Marple moved quickly for her age, her small frame gliding down the staircase. The entrance hall was lit now, the chandelier casting harsh shadows. Eleanor stood at the foot of the stairs, her face white, her hands clutching her nightgown. Charles was beside her, his hair messy, his robe half-tied. Beatrice hovered near the library door, her eyes wide but her mouth shut tight. Sylvia was there too, her curls tangled, her face pale as she hugged herself. Roland burst in from the east wing, his red face sweaty, his voice loud. "What's happened? Who screamed?" "It was Mary, the maid," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. "She found— Oh, Jane, it's awful." She grabbed Miss Marple's arm, her fingers cold. "It's Mr. Vance. He's—" He's dead. Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump, but her face stayed calm. Dead? She said softly, her eyes moving to each face. Where is he? In his room, Eleanor whispered. Mary went to bring him a glass of water. He asked for one late. She found him on the floor, not moving. Charles swore under his breath. This is madness. First he shows up with his blasted codicil, now this? He turned to Beatrice. Did you hear anything? Your room's close to his. Beatrice's eyes flashed. Don't point at me, Charles, I was asleep. Her voice was sharp, like a knife cutting through the tension. Miss Marple noted it, her mind flicking to a St. Mary Mead woman who lied about her whereabouts and paid the price. We need the police, Roland said, his voice too loud, as if he wanted everyone to hear. Tom, fetch them. He waved at the driver who stood in the doorway, his cap in his hands, looking shaken. I've already called, Tom said quietly. Inspector Harrow's on his way. Miss Marple nodded to herself. Inspector Harrow, she'd heard of him, a steady man. Not brilliant, but thorough. She'd met his type in St. Mary Mead, where a constable once missed a clue she'd spotted in a teacup. She turned to Eleanor. May I see the room, dear, before the police arrive? Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. Yes, Jane. You're so sensible. That word again, Miss Marple thought, hiding a smile. Sensible meant seeing what others missed, and she intended to do just that. The east wing was cold, its hallway lined with faded portraits. Vance's room was at the end, the door ajar. Mary, the maid, stood outside, her apron twisted in her hands, her eyes red from crying. He's in there, miss, she whispered. I didn't touch nothing. Miss Marple patted her arm. You did right, Mary. Stay here. She stepped. Inside, her eyes sharp despite the dim light. The room was small but neat, with a single bed, a wardrobe, and a desk where Vance's briefcase sat open. Papers were scattered, but none looked like the codicil. On the floor, near the bed, lay Harold Vance, his thin face gray, his eyes open and staring. His hand clutched a glass, empty but for a drop of clear liquid. Miss Marple knelt, careful not to touch anything. The almond smell was strong here, sharp and bitter. Cyanide, she thought, her mind racing. She'd read about it in a library book, and seen it once in St. Mary Mead, when a jealous wife used it in a pie. She looked around, noting the locked window, the untouched bed, the papers on the desk. A small vial, no bigger than a thimble, lay under the bed, half hidden by the rug. She didn't touch it, but made a mental note. Poison didn't walk into a room. It was brought. Footsteps sounded behind her. Charles and Roland stood in the doorway, their faces grim. What are you doing? Charles snapped. This is a police matter. Miss Marple stood, her face mild. Just looking, dear. It helps to see things clearly. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were sharp, catching Charles's quick glance at the desk. Roland's hands were in his pockets, but they twitched, like he wanted to grab something. She stepped back, letting them think she was just a nosy old lady. The police arrived soon after, their boots loud on the marble floor. Inspector Harrow was a broad man with a gray mustache and steady eyes. He nodded to Miss Marple, recognizing her from a case years ago. Miss Marple, he said, his voice gruff but polite. Didn't expect to see you here. Nor I you. Inspector, she said, smiling, but trouble has a way of finding me. Harrow grunted, then turned to the room. His men were already there, taking notes, checking the body. Looks like poison, he said, sniffing the air. Cyanide, I'd wager. Nasty stuff. He glanced at the family, gathered in the hall. Nobody leaves the manor until we sort this out. Understood? Charles muttered something, but Beatrice grabbed his arm, silencing him. Sylvia's eyes were wet, and Roland's face was redder than ever. Eleanor looked at Miss Marple, her expression pleading. Jane, this is awful. Who would do this? Miss Marple patted her hand. We'll find out, dear. The truth always comes out, like a stain you can't scrub away. Her words were gentle, but her mind was sharp, piecing together the clues, the vial, the papers, the locked window. In St. Mary Mead, a locked room once hid a killer who used a hidden latch. She wondered if Willow Manor had its own secrets. Harrow questioned the family briefly, his notebook open. Charles said he'd been in bed, heard nothing. Beatrice claimed, the same, her voice too smooth. Sylvia admitted she'd walked the hall earlier, unable to sleep, but saw no one. Roland said he'd been in the garden, smoking, though Miss Marple noted his boots were clean. No mud from the damp earth. Lies, she thought, were like bad knitting. One loose thread, and the whole thing unraveled. The inspector sent everyone to their rooms, posting a constable at the door. Miss Marple returned to the blue room, her steps slow but her mind racing. She sat by the window looking at the dark garden below. The wild corner of roses caught her eye again, its thorns sharp in the moonlight. That almond smell, the vial, Vance's death, it all pointed to something deliberate, something planned. She thought of the codicil, the family's faces, the way Vance's eyes had darted in the library. Someone wanted him silent, she thought, but why? Her knitting needles clicked in her mind, though her hands were still. Each clue was a stitch: Vance's papers, Sylvia's fear, Roland's clean boots. She'd seen this before, in her village where a man died to keep a secret buried. Willow Manor was no different. People were people, and greed, she knew, could turn a quiet night into a deadly one. She climbed into bed, the quilt soft but the air heavy. The manor creaked, and somewhere, a floorboard groaned. Miss Marple's eyes stayed open, her mind weaving the night's events into a pattern. Roy, Vance was dead, but the truth, she thought, was still alive, waiting for her to find it. Chapter 4. Secrets in the Study. The morning sun crept through the heavy curtains of the blue room, casting thin stripes of light across the quilt. Miss Jane Marple sat up, her small frame stiff from a restless night. She hadn't slept much, her mind too busy with the events of the previous evening. Harold Vance's death, the bitter almond smell, the vial under the bed. Her sharp eyes, bright despite her age, scanned the room as she slipped into her tweed skirt and pink cardigan. Her knitting lay on the bedside table, untouched, but in her mind, the needles clicked, stitching together clues like a scarf taking shape. In St. Mary Mead, she'd learned that death was never simple, and Willow Manor, she sensed, was hiding a tangle of secrets. She opened her window, letting in the cool air. The garden below sparkled with dew, the roses red and yellow. But the wild corner, thorny and overgrown, caught her eye again. That sour smell, faint now, lingered in her memory. Cyanide, she thought, wasn't something you kept in a house by accident. She closed the window and picked up her handbag, her steps soft but sure as she headed downstairs. Breakfast would be a chance to watch the family, to see who flinched, who lied. The dining room was quieter than the night before, the long table set with toast, jam, and a pot of tea. Lady Eleanor Grayson sat at the head, her face pale, her silver hair neat but her eyes tired. Charles was there, his dark hair uncombed, his fingers tapping the table. Beatrice, in a green dress now, sipped tea, her sharp eyes darting to the door. Sylvia, the niece, sat hunched, her brown curls falling over her plate as she picked at a piece of toast. Roland was absent, and Miss Marple noted it, her mind flicking to his clean boots last night. No mud despite his claim of being in the garden. Good. Morning, Jane, Eleanor said, her voice thin. I hope you slept well, considering. Miss Marple smiled, taking a seat. Well enough, dear. A quiet house, even with trouble, is restful in its way. Her tone was gentle, but her eyes were sharp, catching Charles's quick glance at Beatrice, Sylvia's trembling fingers, Eleanor's forced smile. Trouble, she thought, made people show their true colors, like a stain on a white cloth. The tea was strong, the toast crisp, but the air was heavy. Nobody spoke of Vance's death, though it hung over the table like fog. Inspector Harrow had left a constable at the manor, and Miss Marple heard his boots pacing outside. She buttered her toast, listening as Charles muttered about the police, poking around. Beatrice snapped at him to be quiet, her voice sharp like broken glass. Sylvia said nothing, her eyes on her plate. Miss Marple sipped her tea, remembering a St. Mary mead breakfast where silence hid a thief's guilt. She wondered what this silence hid. After breakfast, Eleanor suggested a walk in the garden, but Miss Marple had other plans. "I'd like to see the library again, dear," she said. "It's such a lovely room." Eleanor nodded, distracted, and Miss Marple slipped away, her handbag light in her hand. The library was where Vance had dropped his bombshell about the codicil, and she wanted to look closer. In her village, a desk once held a letter that solved a theft. She hoped the library held something similar. The room was empty, the fire cold now, the shelves looming like silent guards. Miss Marple's eyes moved over the oak table where Vance's briefcase had sat. It was gone, likely with the police, but she noticed a small drawer in the table, half hidden by a carved edge. She tugged it open, her fingers careful. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded, with Vance's neat handwriting. It read, "The truth lies in the rose garden." Her heart gave a little jump. The rose garden, that wild corner she'd noticed. She tucked the note into her handbag, her face calm but her mind racing. A cryptic note was like a loose thread in St. Mary mead, where a scribbled message once led her to a liar. She looked around, checking the shelves, the rug, the windows. Nothing else stood out, but the note was enough. It was a clue, and Miss Marple loved clues. Voices came from the hall, low and angry. She stepped to the door, listening. It was Charles and Beatrice near the staircase. "We can't afford to wait," Charles hissed. "The manor's bleeding us dry, and now this codicil nonsense." "Keep your voice down," Beatrice snapped. "Do you want everyone to know we're broke?" Her words were sharp like a slap. Miss Marple stood still, her breath slow. Money troubles, she thought, were a motive as old as time. In her village, a man once stole for less. The voices faded. As they moved away and Miss Marple slipped out, her steps soft on the marble floor. She wanted to see Vance's room again, to check if the police had missed anything. The east wing was quiet, the constable now at the front door. She tapped lightly on Vance's door, then pushed it open. The room was as she'd left it. Bed, neat, desk bare, the vial gone, likely taken by Harrow's men. The almond smell was fainter but still there, sharp and bitter. She knelt by the bed, her eyes scanning the floor. A tiny scrap of paper no bigger than a stamp was caught in the rug's fringe. She picked it up, her fingers careful. It had a single word. Sylvia. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Sylvia, the quiet niece, who trembled and said little. Was she a target, a suspect, or both? The scrap went into her handbag next to the note about the rose garden. She stood smoothing her skirt and left the room, her mind turning over the clues. In St. Mary mead, a name on a scrap once pointed to a jealous lover. Here, it might mean something darker. Back in the hall, she saw Sylvia hurrying toward the garden, her coat buttoned wrong, her face pale. Miss Marple followed, keeping her distance. The garden was bright, the roses heavy with dew, but Sylvia went straight to the wild corner, where thorns tangled like a net. She knelt, her hands digging in the dirt, then stopped, looking around as if scared. Miss Marple stayed behind a hedge, her small frame hidden. Sylvia pulled something from her pocket, a small cloth bundle, and tucked it under a bush, then hurried away. Miss Marple waited, then approached the spot. She didn't dig, not yet. The police would need to see it, but she noted the bush, its thorns sharp and red-tipped. The rose garden, she thought, was more than it seemed. The note in her handbag felt heavier now. Its words, "The truth lies in the rose garden," echoing in her mind. She returned to the manor, her steps slow but her thoughts fast. Inspector Harrow was in the dining room, his notebook open, questioning Roland. The cousin's voice was loud, his face red. "I told you, I was in the garden last night smoking. What's this about my boots? They're clean because I'm careful." Miss Marple paused outside, listening. Clean boots, she thought, were a lie. The garden was muddy, and no smoker was that careful at midnight. Harrow saw her and nodded. "Miss Marple, a word?" He stepped into the hall, his mustache twitching. "You've got a reputation, you know. Found anything I should know about?" She smiled, her face mild. "Just small things, Inspector. A note here, a scrap there. Nothing clear yet." She didn't mention the rose garden or Sylvia's name. Harrow was thorough, but he missed the small stitches, the ones that made the pattern. She'd share when the time was right. The day passed in a blur of questions. Harrow spoke to each family member, their voices rising and falling behind closed doors. Miss Marple stayed close, her ears sharp, her knitting in her lap as she sat in the drawing room. Charles complained about the Manor's costs again, his voice loud through the wall. Beatrice was cold, her answers short. Sylvia cried, saying she barely knew Vance. Roland laughed too much, his stories tangled. Eleanor, poor Eleanor, begged Harrow to be quick, to let them grieve. By evening, Miss Marple sat by her window, the note and scrap in her handbag. The rose garden glowed in the dusk, its wild corner dark and secret. She thought of Vance's death, the codicil, the almond smell. Someone had wanted him gone. And Sylvia's name, that scrap, pointed somewhere. In St. Mary Mead, a note once led to a killer. Here, she thought, it might do the same. Her needles clicked, though her hands were still. The truth, she knew, was in the garden, in the secrets, in the lies. And Miss Marple, with her quiet ways and sharp eyes, was ready to pull the thread and see what unraveled. Chapter 5. The Will Revealed. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Willow Manor's library, casting long shadows across the oak table. Miss Jane Marple sat in her usual chair near the fireplace, her small hands folded over her handbag, her pink cardigan neat despite the restless night, her sharp eyes bright as ever, watched the family gather, their faces tight with worry and expectation. The air was thick with tension, like a storm about to break. Harold Vance's death the night before had shaken the manor, and now, with Inspector Harrow's permission, his briefcase had been returned to reveal Sir Reginald Grayson's will, or rather its codicil. Miss Marple's mind was busy, her imaginary knitting needles clicking as she stitched together the clues. The almond smell, the vial, the note about the rose garden, the scrap with Sylvia's name. Lady Eleanor Grayson sat at the head of the table, her silver hair pinned tightly, her hands clutching a lace handkerchief. Her eyes were red, as if she'd cried all night. Charles, her son, stood by the window, his dark hair messy, his jaw tight. Beatrice, his wife, sat stiffly, her green dress sharp against the dark wood, her eyes narrow like a cat's. Sylvia, the niece, was curled in a chair, her brown curls falling over her pale face, her fingers twisting a loose thread on her skirt. Roland, the cousin, paced near the bookshelf, his red face redder than usual, his loud voice silent for now. Miss Marple noted it all, their glances, their fidgeting, the way the room felt like a pot ready to boil over. Inspector Harrow stood by the table, his gray mustache twitching as he held Vance's briefcase. A constable stood at the door, his boots scuffing the rug. "Right," Harrow said, his voice gruff but steady. "Mr. Vance was here to read Sir Reginald's codicil. Since he can't, I've checked with his firm and they've authorized me to share it. But let's be clear. Nobody touches these papers and nobody leaves until we're done." He glanced at Miss Marple, his eyes narrowing slightly. She smiled, her face mild, but her mind was sharp, remembering a St. Mary Mead will that sparked a feud and a theft. Harrow opened the briefcase, pulling out the sealed envelope with the Grayson crest, a lion and a rose. He broke the wax, the crack loud in the quiet room. The family leaned forward, even Sylvia, whose eyes flicked up for the first time. Miss Marple watched them, her heart steady but her thoughts racing. Wills, she knew, were like keys to locked doors. Behind them lay greed, fear, or worse. The sigh, Inspector cleared his throat, unfolding the yellowed paper. "This is the codicil to Sir Reginald Grayson's will, dated 1 year ago, signed and witnessed. It changes the distribution of his estate, including Willow Manor, its lands, and all assets." He paused, his eyes scanning the room. The original will left everything to Charles Grayson with provisions for Lady Eleanor. This codicil alters that. Charles's head snapped up. Alters? What does that mean? His voice was loud. His hands clenched. Beatrice grabbed his arm, her nails digging in. Charles, let him read, she hissed, but her eyes were on the paper, hungry. Harrow continued. To my niece, Sylvia Grayson, I leave the entirety of Willow Manor, its lands, and all financial assets to be held in trust until she reaches the age of 25. Should she not survive to that age, the estate reverts to my cousin, Roland Grayson, under the condition that he maintains the manor as a family home. The room went still, like a clock stopped ticking. Sylvia's mouth opened, a small gasp, escaping. Charles's face turned red, his fists tight. Beatrice's eyes widened, then narrowed, her lips a thin line. Roland stopped pacing, his red face pale now, his eyes darting to Sylvia. Eleanor's handkerchief fell to the table, her hands shaking. Miss Marple's face stayed calm, but her mind jumped. Sylvia, the quiet niece, was now the heir, and a target. In St. Mary Mead, an inheritance once led to a poisoned pie. She wondered what it would lead to here. Why Sylvia? Charles roared, stepping toward Harrow. She's barely family, father never even liked her. His voice shook the shelves, and Miss Marple noted his anger raw and hot like a man who'd lost everything. Charles, please, Eleanor whispered, her voice breaking. Your father. He had his reasons. But her eyes were on Sylvia, soft and sad as if hiding a secret. Miss Marple caught it, her mind flicking to the note in her handbag. The truth lies in the rose garden. Reasons, she thought, often meant secrets. Sylvia shrank in her chair, her curls hiding her face. I didn't ask for this, she mumbled, her voice small. I don't want it. But her hands trembled, and Miss Marple saw fear in her eyes, like a rabbit caught in a trap. Roland laughed, a loud, forced sound that made everyone jump. Well, isn't this a twist? Little Sylvia, the manners lady, and me, the backup? Ha! But his eyes were cold, and his hands twitched, like he was holding back a storm. Miss Marple watched him, remembering a St. Mary Mead man who laughed like that before he stole a neighbor's savings. Beatrice stood, her chair scraping the floor. This is absurd. Sylvia's a child. She can't run an estate. Her voice was sharp, like a knife slicing through the tension. She turned to Harrow. Are you sure this is legal? Father-in-law was old, maybe confused. Harrow's mustache twitched. The codicils witnessed, Mrs. Grayson. 2 signatures, Vance and a clerk from his firm. It's legal, unless proven otherwise. He folded the paper, slipping it back into the envelope. But given Vance's death, we're investigating. Nobody benefits until we're sure what happened. Charles swore under his breath. So we're stuck waiting for your lot to dawdle while the manor falls apart? He turned to Sylvia, his eyes hard. What do you know about this girl? Did you sweet-talk father? Sylvia's head snapped up, her eyes wet. I didn't. I barely saw him. Her voice cracked, and she ran from the room, her footsteps echoing in the hall. Eleanor started to follow, but Miss Marple touched her arm. Let her go, dear. She needs a moment. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes followed Sylvia's path, thinking of the cloth bundle in the rose garden. The room emptied slowly, the family scattering like leaves in a wind. Charles stormed out, Beatrice close behind, her heels clicking. Roland muttered something about needing air and left for the garden. Eleanor stayed, her hands shaking as she picked up her handkerchief. Jane, she whispered, this is tearing us apart. What's happening? Miss Marple patted her hand, her face kind but her mind sharp. People get upset when money's involved, dear, but the truth always comes out like a stain you can't hide. She didn't mention the note or the scrap with Sylvia's name. Eleanor was fragile, and Miss Marple needed more pieces before she shared. Harrow approached, his notebook open. Miss Marple, you've a knack for noticing things. Seen anything odd? His voice was gruff, but there was respect in his eyes. She'd helped him once in a case involving a stolen brooch by spotting a smudge on a glove. Just small things, Inspector, she said, smiling. A word here, a look there, nothing clear yet. She kept the note and scrap to herself, not because she distrusted Harrow, but because she needed to see the pattern first. In St. Mary Mead, she'd learned to hold her cards close until the game was clear. The rest of the day was tense, the manor buzzing with whispers and footsteps. Miss Marple stayed close to the family, her ears sharp, her knitting in her lap as she sat in the drawing room. She heard Charles and Beatrice arguing, again their voices low but angry through the wall. "We're ruined if Sylvia gets it," Charles hissed. "We need to fight this." Beatrice's reply was cold. "Then do something, Charles, before it's too late." Miss Marple's needles paused in her mind, her thoughts on their desperation. Money, she knew, could push people to dark places. Sylvia stayed in her room, the maid said, refusing lunch. Roland was in the garden smoking, his boots now muddy, unlike last night, Miss Marple noted. Eleanor moved through the house like a ghost, her eyes distant. Harrow and his men searched Vance's room again, finding nothing new, but the almond. Smell lingered in Miss Marple's memory, sharp and deadly. By afternoon, she slipped back to the library, wanting another look at the drawer where she'd found the note. It was empty now, but she noticed a faint scratch on the table's edge, like something heavy had been dragged across it. A safe, perhaps, she thought, hidden somewhere close. In St. Mary Mead, a scratched desk once hid a locked box with a confession. She made a mental note to check the walls later. As dusk fell, Miss Marple stood by her window, looking at the rose garden. The wild corner was dark, its thorns sharp in the fading light. The note, "The truth lies in the rose garden," felt heavy in her handbag, next to the scrap with Sylvia's name. She thought of Sylvia's fear, Charles's anger, Beatrice's cold eyes, Roland's lies. The codicil had lit a fuse, and Vance's death was the first explosion. Someone, she thought, wanted Sylvia out of the way, or the truth buried. Her knitting needles clicked in her mind, each clue a stitch. The will, the note, the vial, the garden. They were all part of a pattern, and Miss Marple, with her quiet ways and sharp eyes, was determined to unravel it before the next stitch turned deadly. Chapter 6. Shadows of the Past. The afternoon sun hung low over Willow Manor, casting golden streaks across the rose garden. Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing room, her small hands folded over her black handbag, her pink cardigan neat despite the restless morning. Her sharp eyes, bright as ever, watched the family through the open door, their movements tense, their voices low. The revelation of Sir Reginald's codicil, leaving the estate to Sylvia, the quiet niece, had stirred the house like a stone in a pond, and Harold Vance's death, with its bitter almond smell, had made the ripples dangerous. Miss Marple's mind was busy, her imaginary knitting needles clicking as she wove together clues, the note about the rose garden, the scrap with Sylvia's name, the vial under Vance's bed, the scratch on the library table. In St. Mary Mead, she'd learned that secrets like shadows grew long in the quiet, and Willow Manor was casting plenty. Lady Eleanor Grayson drifted through the hall, her silver hair loose now, her face pale as she murmured to a maid about tea. Charles paced the dining room, his dark hair messy, his voice sharp as he argued with Beatrice, whose green dress flashed like a warning. Sylvia had stayed in her room since the will's reading, her absence loud in its own way. Roland was outside, his red face redder in the cold, his boots muddy now, unlike the clean ones he'd claimed the night of Vance's death. Miss Marple noted it all, her heart steady but her thoughts racing. People she knew showed their truth in small ways, a glance, a lie, a trembling hand. She sipped her tea, the cup warm in her hands, and thought of the note in her handbag. The truth lies in the rose garden. The wild corner of thorns nagged at her, as did Sylvia's cloth bundle, hidden there yesterday. And the scrap with Sylvia's name. Why was it in Vance's room? In St. Mary Mead, a name on a paper once, led to a jealous wife's confession. Here it might mean something darker. A soft knock broke her thoughts. Sylvia stood at the door, her brown curls tangled, her eyes red from crying. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice small. "Can I talk to you? Alone?" Her hands twisted, together like a child caught stealing jam. "Of course, dear," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle but her eyes sharp. "Come sit. Tea?" She poured a cup, her movements slow, giving Sylvia time to settle. The girl sat, her skirt crumpled, her fingers clutching the cup like a lifeline. "I don't know what to do," Sylvia whispered, her eyes on the floor. "The wills, everyone hates me now. Charles thinks I schemed for it, Beatrice won't even look at me, and Roland—" She shivered, her voice trailing off. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soft. "Why do you think they're upset, dear? It's not your fault what Sir Reginald wrote." Her words were kind, but her mind was sharp, watching Sylvia's face for the truth. Sylvia's eyes flicked up, wet and wide. "It's not just the will, it's the family. There's something nobody talks about. Something from years ago, when I was little." She paused, her fingers trembling. "Uncle Reginald, Sir Reginald. He had a first wife. Before Aunt Eleanor. Nobody mentions her, but I heard whispers when I was small. She disappeared." Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump, but her face stayed calm. "Disappeared?" she said, her tone light, as if asking about the weather. "How curious. What do you know about her, dear?" Sylvia swallowed, her voice low. "Not much. I was only 5 or 6 when I came to live here. My parents died in a car crash, and Uncle Reginald took me in. But I remember the maids talking, saying his first wife, Clara, her name was, ran off. Or worse. They stopped when they saw me, but I never forgot. And Uncle Reginald, he was kind to me, but he'd get sad sometimes, looking at me like I reminded him of someone." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. A missing wife, a sad look, a codicil giving Sylvia the estate. It was a pattern, like a scarf half knit. In St. Mary Mead, a woman once vanished, and the village whispered of murder until Miss Marple found her alive, hiding from a cruel husband. But here, with Vance's death and the almond smell, she feared a darker truth. "Did you ever ask about Clara?" Miss Marple said, her eyes on Sylvia's trembling hands. Sylvia shook her head. "I tried once with Aunt Eleanor. She got pale and changed the subject. Said it was old history, not worth digging up. But now, with the will, I think it's why everyone's so angry. Maybe Clara had something to do with it." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her thoughts spinning. The rose garden note, Sylvia's name, the codicil. Clara's disappearance might tie them together. She remembered the cloth bundle Sylvia hid in, the garden. Was it connected? In her village, a hidden letter once revealed a secret marriage. She needed to see that bundle, but carefully. "Thank you, dear," Miss Marple said, patting Sylvia's hand. "You've been very brave, don't worry too much. Things have a way of coming clear." Her smile was warm, but her mind was cold, sharp, stitching clues together. Sylvia nodded, her eyes still wet, and left, her steps soft in the hall. Miss A. Marple stayed in the drawing room, her handbag heavy with the note and scrap. She wanted to check the rose garden, but Inspector Harrow was outside, questioning the gardener about last night's comings and goings. Instead, she slipped back to the library, her steps quiet on the marble floor. The room was empty, the air still smelling of old books and cold ash. She went to the oak table, her fingers tracing the scratch she'd noticed yesterday. It was deeper than she'd thought, like a safe had been moved. She tapped the wall behind the shelves, listening for a hollow sound. Nothing yet, but she'd check again later. In St. Mary Mead, a hollow wall once hid a stolen necklace. Voices came from the dining room, Charles and Beatrice again, their words sharp through the thin walls. "Sylvia can't have it," Charles hissed. "We'll fight." The codicil. Father wasn't in his right mind. Beatrice's voice was colder. "Then find proof, Charles, or we're finished." Miss Marple's imaginary needles clicked faster. Money, she thought, was a motive. But so was fear. Fear of a secret, like Clara's disappearance. She left the library, her eyes catching a maid. Mary, the one who'd found Vance carrying a tray to the east wing. Miss Marple followed, her steps slow, her face mild. "Mary, dear," she called softly. A moment. The maid stopped, her apron twisted in her hands, her eyes nervous. "Yes, miss," Mary said, her voice small. "You were up late last night bringing Mr. Vance water," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle. "Did you see anything odd? Anyone in the hall?" Mary's eyes darted away. "No, miss, it was quiet. Except for Miss Sylvia walking earlier. She looked upset, but I didn't ask." Her hands twisted tighter and Miss Marple noted it. Mary was scared, like a St. Mary Mead girl who'd seen a thief but wouldn't tell. "Thank you, dear," Miss Marple said, smiling. "You're doing fine." But her mind was sharp, adding Mary's words to the pattern. Sylvia in the hall upset before Vance's death. It fit with the scrap, but not enough to accuse. She needed more. By evening, the manor was heavy with silence, the family avoiding each other. Miss Marple sat by her window, the rose garden dark below. The wild corner of thorns seemed to call her, its secrets hidden in the shadows. She thought of Clara, the missing wife, and Sylvia's sad eyes, the codicil, the note, the almond smell. They were all threads, and Clara's story might be the needle to tie them together. She took out her knitting, the needles clicking for real now, the rhythm calming her thoughts. In St. Mary Mead, a missing woman once led to a killer. Here, with Vance dead and Sylvia the heir, Miss Marple feared the shadows of the past were growing longer and deadlier by the hour. Chapter 7. The Rose Garden Clue. The morning mist hung low over Willow Manor, curling around the rose garden like a soft gray scarf. Miss Jane Marple stood at her window in the blue room, her small hands adjusting her pink cardigan, her sharp eyes scanning the garden below. The roses sparkled with dew, their red and yellow petals bright, but the wild corner, thorny and tangled, drew her gaze. The note in her handbag, "The truth lies in the rose garden," had kept her awake, its words looping in her mind. Sylvia's cloth bundle hidden there, and the scrap with her name found in Vance's room, were threads in a pattern she couldn't yet see. In St. Mary Mead, a hidden clue once solved a theft. Here, with Harold Vance dead and a codicil stirring trouble, Miss Marple sensed the garden held something vital. She slipped her black shoes on, tucked her handbag under her arm, and headed downstairs. The manor was quiet, its halls heavy with the weight of yesterday's shocks, the will naming Sylvia as heir, Clara's mysterious disappearance, the bitter almond smell of cyanide. Her knitting needles clicked in her mind, stitching together Charles's anger, Beatrice's cold eyes, Sylvia's fear, Roland's lies, and Eleanor's sadness. People she knew hid their secrets like weeds in a garden, and she meant to pull them out. The dining room was empty, the breakfast dishes cleared. A maid, Mary, who'd found Vance, hurried past, her apron twisted, her eyes down. Miss Marple paused, her voice gentle. "Mary, dear, is anyone about?" Mary jumped, her face pale. "No, miss. Lady Eleanor's in her room. Mr. Charles and Mrs. Beatrice are out walking. Miss Sylvia's still upstairs. Mr. Roland's in the stables, I think." Her words were quick, like she wanted to run. Miss Marple smiled, noting the fear in her eyes, like a St. Mary Mead girl who'd seen something she shouldn't. "Thank you, dear," Miss Marple said, her tone kind but her mind sharp. She stepped outside, the air cool and damp, the gravel path crunching under her shoes. The rose garden was to the left, its neat rows leading to the wild corner where Sylvia had knelt. Miss Marple moved slowly, her small frame blending with the mist, her eyes scanning for watchers. Inspector Harrow's constable was at the front gate, too far to see her. The garden was hers for now. The wild corner was a tangle of thorns, the roses overgrown, their stems thick and sharp. She found the bush Sylvia had touched, its red-tipped thorns glinting. Kneeling carefully, her skirt brushing the damp earth, she peered under the bush. There, half buried in the dirt, was the cloth bundle, a small handkerchief tied with string. She didn't touch it, not yet. The police would need to see it, but she noted its shape, small and lumpy, like it held something hard. In St. Mary Mead, a buried box once hid a stolen ring. She wondered what this held. She stood, her knees creaking, and looked closer at the ground. The dirt was loose, recently turned, but something else caught her eye. A glint of metal near the fountain, half hidden by a rose bush. She bent down, her fingers careful, and pulled out a small locket, silver and tarnished, its chain broken. She opened it, her heart giving a little jump. Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman, her brown curls and soft eyes strikingly, like Sylvia's. Miss Marple's mind raced. Clara, she thought, Sir Reginald's first wife who'd vanished. The locket was old, its edges worn, but the face was clear. Sylvia's resemblance was no coincidence. She tucked the locket into her handbag next to the note and the scrap with Sylvia's name. The rose garden, she thought, was living up to its promise. The note had led her here, and now she had a new clue, a locket that tied Sylvia to Clara. In her village, a locket once revealed a secret lover. Here, it might mean something deeper, something tied to the codicil and Vance's death. Footsteps crunched behind her. She turned, her face mild, to see Roland approaching, his red face sweaty, his boots muddy. "Miss Marple," he called, his voice too loud. "What are you doing out here, snooping in the roses?" He laughed, but his eyes were cold, like a St. Mary Mead man who'd lied about a debt. "Just admiring the garden, Mr. Roland," she said, her smile gentle. "It's lovely, though this corner's a bit wild, don't you think?" Her tone was light, but her eyes watched his hands, which twitched in his pockets. He shrugged, his laugh forced. "Wild's how gardens grow, I suppose. Been like that for years." He stepped closer, his boots sinking into the mud. "You shouldn't be out here alone, old lady. Could trip on a thorn." His words were friendly, but his tone wasn't, and Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face stayed calm. "Thank you for your concern," she said, stepping back, "but I'm quite steady." She turned, her steps slow, and headed back to the manor, feeling his eyes on her back. Roland's lie about the garden last night, clean boots when the ground was muddy, nagged at her. He was hiding something, and the rose garden, she thought, might hold his secret too. Inside, the manor was still quiet, but the air felt heavier, like a storm was coming. Miss Marple found Eleanor in the drawing room, her silver hair loose, her hands twisting her handkerchief. "Jane," she said, her voice trembling, "this house feels cursed. First Reginald, now Mr. Vance. And the will, it's tearing us apart." Miss Marple sat beside her, her voice soft. "Families often quarrel over money, dear, but it's the secrets behind the money that cause the real trouble." She patted Eleanor's hand, her mind on the locket. "Tell me, do you know anything about a locket? Silver with a photograph?" Eleanor's face went paler, her eyes wide. "A locket, no. I don't think so." Her voice shook, and Miss Marple noted it like a St. Mary Mead woman who'd lied about a stolen brooch. Eleanor knew something, but she wasn't ready to tell. "That's all right, dear," Miss Marple said, smiling. "Just a thought." She didn't push. Eleanor was fragile, and pushing too hard could break her. Instead, she went to the library, hoping to find more about the scratch on the table. The room was empty, the air smelling of dust and old books. She tapped the wall again, listening for a hollow sound, but found none. The scratch, though, was deeper than she'd thought, like a safe had been dragged. She made a mental note to ask Mary about hidden safes later. Voices came from the hall, Charles and Beatrice arguing again. "Sylvia can't have the manor," Charles hissed. "We'll lose everything." Beatrice's reply was cold. Then, "Make sure she doesn't, Charles." Miss Marple's imaginary needles clicked faster. Threats, she thought, were dangerous threads, and Charles's anger was a loose one. She slipped upstairs to Sylvia's room, knocking softly. The girl opened. The door, her eyes red, her curls messy. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice small. I don't know what to do, everyone's so angry." Miss Marple sat on a chair, her handbag in her lap. "It's a hard time, dear. But tell me, have you ever seen a locket? Silver with a woman's picture?" She watched Sylvia's face, her eyes sharp. Sylvia's hands froze. A locket? No. I mean, maybe. Uncle Reginald gave me one once when I was little. Said it was special, but I lost it years ago. Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple saw truth mixed with fear, like a St. Mary Mead girl who'd hidden a love letter. Thank you, dear, Miss Marple said, standing. Don't worry, things will clear up. She left, her mind racing. The locket was Clara's, she was sure, and Sylvia's resemblance was no accident. The codicil, the rose garden, Vance's death, they were all tied to Clara's story, and Sylvia was at the center. By evening, Inspector Harrow called everyone to the dining room, his notebook open. "We've found traces of cyanide in Vance's glass," he said, his mustache twitching. "Someone poisoned him and it was no accident. I need alibis again. Where were you all before midnight?" Charles and Beatrice claimed they were in bed. Sylvia said she'd walked the hall. Roland repeated his garden story. Miss Marple listened, her eyes on Roland's muddy boots, now fitting his tale but not last night's. Harrow turned to her. "Miss Marple, you're quiet. Got anything to add?" His voice was gruff, but he knew her reputation. "Just small things, Inspector," she said, smiling. "A garden can tell stories if you look close." She didn't mention the locket, or the bundle, not yet. Harrow was thorough, but he missed the small stitches, and she needed the full pattern. The manor settled into an uneasy night, the family avoiding each other's eyes. Miss Marple sat by her window, the locket heavy in her handbag. The rose garden glowed in the moonlight, its wild corner dark with secrets. Clara's face, Sylvia's fear, the codicil's surprise, they were all threads, and the rose garden was the knot. In St. Mary Mead, a clue in a garden once led to a killer. Here, Miss Marple thought, it might do the same, if she could pull the right thread before another fell. Chapter 8. A Second Tragedy. The midday sun filtered through the heavy curtains of Willow Manor's drawing room, casting faint patterns on the faded rug. Miss Jane Marple sat in a cushioned chair, her small hands resting on her black handbag, her pink cardigan neat despite the restless morning. Her sharp eyes, bright as ever, watched the family move through the house, their faces tight with fear and suspicion. Harold Vance's death, with its bitter almond smell, had shaken the manor, and the codicil naming Sylvia as heir had lit a fuse. The locket in Miss Marple's handbag, with its photograph of a woman resembling Sylvia, likely Clara, Sir Reginald's vanished first wife, had tightened the knot of secrets. The note, "The truth lies in the rose garden," and the scrap, with Sylvia's name were threads in a pattern she was still weaving, her imaginary knitting needles clicking in her mind. In St. Mary Mead, a second crime often followed a first, and Miss Marple sensed the manor was holding its breath for more trouble. The house was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that hid a storm. Lady Eleanor Grayson was in her room, her silver, hair loose, her eyes red from worry. Charles paced the hall, his dark hair messy, his voice low but angry as he spoke to Beatrice, whose green dress flashed like a warning. Sylvia stayed upstairs, her door closed since her talk with Miss Marple about Clara's disappearance. Roland was in the garden, his red face sweaty, his boots muddy, unlike the clean ones he'd claimed the night Vance died. Miss Marple noted it all, her heart steady but her thoughts racing. Secrets, she knew, were like weeds. Pull one and another sprouted. She sipped tea in the drawing room, the cup warm in her hands, her eyes on the rose garden through the window. The wild corner, with its thorny bushes and hidden cloth bundle, nagged at her. The locket with Clara's face pointed to a family secret tied to Sylvia. In St. Mary Mead, a second crime, a theft, once followed a death, and Miss Marple feared Willow Manor was on the same path. A sudden crash came from the dining room, followed by a choked gasp. Miss Marple set her cup down, her small frame moving quickly despite her age. She reached the dining room to find Beatrice on the floor, her green dress crumpled, her hands clutching her throat. A teacup lay shattered beside her, its contents spilling across the wood. The air carried that sharp, bitter almond smell. Cyanide, Miss Marple thought, her heart jumping but her face calm. Charles knelt beside Beatrice, his face pale, shouting, "Help! Someone! Help!" Eleanor rushed in, her handkerchief falling, her voice shaking. "Oh no! Beatrice!" Sylvia appeared at the door, her brown curls tangled, her eyes wide with fear. Roland burst in from the garden, his boots tracking mud, his loud voice silenced, for once. Miss Marple knelt by Beatrice, her fingers careful not to touch the spilled tea. Beatrice's eyes were open, her breathing shallow but steady. She was alive, but barely. "Call the doctor," Miss Marple said, her voice firm. "And Inspector Harrow, quickly." Tom, the driver, ran to the phone, his cap falling in his haste. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the room, the shattered cup, the spilled tea, the tray on the table. A teapot sat there, steam curling from its spout. She sniffed it, her nose wrinkling at the almond smell. Poison, she thought, deliberate and bold. Eleanor wrung her hands. Who would do this? First Mr. Vance, now Beatrice. Her voice broke, and Miss Marple patted her arm, her mind sharp. 2 poisonings in 2 days. It was no coincidence. In St. Mary Mead, a second attempt once pointed to a desperate killer. Charles lifted Beatrice's head, his hands shaking. She's breathing, thank God. But who did this? His eyes turned to Sylvia, hard and accusing. "You made the tea, didn't you?" Sylvia's face went white. I did, but I didn't put anything in it, I swear." Her voice cracked, her hands twisting her skirt. Miss Marple watched her, noting the fear, the trembling fingers. Sylvia was scared, but was it guilt or something else? The scrap with her name flashed in Miss Marple's mind, along with the cloth bundle in the garden. Roland stepped forward, his red face grim. "This is madness. Poison in the tea? We're all at risk." His voice was loud, but his eyes darted to the teapot, like he wanted to grab it. Miss Marple noted it, her mind flicking to a St. Mary Mead man who shouted to hide his theft. The doctor arrived first, a stout man with a black bag, followed by Inspector Harrow, his gray mustache twitching. The doctor checked Beatrice, his fingers quick. "She's lucky," he said. "A small dose, not enough to kill. She'll recover, but she needs rest." He gave her a shot, and Tom helped carry her to her room, Charles following, his face a mix of relief and rage. Harrow turned to the family, his notebook open. "Nobody leaves this room until I say. That tea was poisoned, same as Vance's glass. Cyanide, I'd bet. Who poured it?" His eyes were hard, moving from face to face. Sylvia shrank back. "I made the pot, but I wouldn't." Her eyes filled with tears, and Miss Marple stepped closer, her voice gentle. "Tell the truth, dear. Did you leave the pot alone at all?" Sylvia nodded, her voice small. "Just for a minute. I went to get sugar from the kitchen. Anyone could have." She trailed off, her eyes on the floor. Miss Marple's heart quickened. A minute was enough for poison, she knew, like a St. Mary Mead case where a distracted cook lost her jewels. Harrow wrote in his notebook, "Right. I'll need statements, from everyone. And that teapot's going to the lab." He turned to Miss Marple, his voice low. "You've got a nose for this, Miss Felis. Seen anything I should know?" She smiled, her face mild. "Just small things, Inspector. A cup here, a look there, nothing clear yet." She didn't mention the locket, the note, or the cloth bundle. Harrow was steady, but he missed the small stitches, and she needed the full pattern before sharing. The family gave their statements, their voices tight. Charles said he'd been in the library reading. Eleanor was in her room resting. Roland claimed he was in the stables, though his muddy boots suggested the garden. Sylvia repeated her story about the sugar. Miss Marple listened, her eyes on their hands, their eyes, their lies. Roland's boots, muddy now but clean the night of Vance's death, nagged at her. And Sylvia's fear, was it guilt or a target's panic? After Harrow left to check the teapot, Miss Marple slipped to the rose garden, her steps soft on the gravel. The wild corner was quiet, the thorns sharp in the fading light. She knelt by the bush, her fingers careful, and found the cloth bundle still there, untouched. She didn't open it. Harrow needed to see it first, but its weight felt familiar, like the locket. She stood, her eyes scanning the garden. The fountain where she'd found the locket gleamed nearby, its water clear but cold. The note, "The truth lies in the rose garden," felt heavier now, tied to Clara, Sylvia, and the poisonings. Back inside, she found Sylvia in the hall, her face pale. "Miss Marple," she whispered, "they think I did it. Charles, Beatrice, they're saying I poisoned her." Her voice broke, and Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind sharp. "Don't fret, dear," she said. "The truth has a way of showing itself like a stain on a clean shirt." But her thoughts were on the bundle, the locket, the almond smell. Sylvia was either a victim or a clever liar, and Miss Marple needed more to decide. By evening, Beatrice was awake, weak but alive, her eyes angry. Charles stayed by her side, his voice low and fierce. Eleanor moved through the house like a ghost, her handkerchief twisted. Roland smoked in the garden, his eyes on the wild corner. Miss Marple sat by her window, the locket and note in her handbag, her knitting needles clicking in her mind. The rose garden, Clara's face, Sylvia's fear, the cyanide, they were all threads, and the second poisoning had tightened the knot. In St. Mary Mead, a second crime once led to a killer's mistake. Here, Miss Marple thought, it might do the same, if she could find the right thread to pull before another fell. Chapter 9. Village Parallels. The late afternoon light filtered through the drawing-room windows of Willow Manor, casting soft shadows on the faded rug. Miss Jane Marple sat in her usual chair, her small hands folded over her black handbag, her pink cardigan neat, despite the heavy air. Her sharp eyes, bright as ever, watched the house settle into an uneasy calm after the morning's shock. Beatrice's near-fatal poisoning, the bitter almond smell of cyanide, Sylvia's trembling denial that she'd tampered with the tea. The locket in Miss Marple's handbag with its photograph of a woman resembling Sylvia, likely Clara, Sir Reginald's vanished first wife, felt heavier now, as did the note. "The truth lies in the rose garden," and the scrap with Sylvia's name. Her imaginary knitting needles clicked in her mind, stitching together the clues. Vance's death, the codicil naming Sylvia as heir, the cloth bundle in the garden, the locket's haunting face. In St. Mary Mead, she'd learned that a second crime often pointed to the first, and Willow Manor, she sensed, was unraveling toward a dangerous truth. The manor was quiet, but it was the quiet of a held breath. Lady Eleanor Grayson was in the dining room, her silver hair loose, her hands twisting her lace handkerchief as she spoke to a maid. Charles stayed with Beatrice, who rested upstairs, her recovery slow but sure. Sylvia hid in her room, avoiding the accusing stares. Roland was outside, his red face grim, his muddy boots pacing the garden paths, though Miss Marple noted he avoided the wild corner where the cloth bundle lay. Inspector Harrow and his constable were in the east wing, examining the teapot, their voices low through the walls. Miss Marple sipped her tea, the cup warm in her hands, her eyes on the rose garden through the window. The wild corner with its thorny bushes called to her, but she needed to talk to Eleanor first. Secrets she knew often slipped out over tea like a loose stitch in a scarf. She found Eleanor alone in the dining room, the table cleared except for a single teacup. Clean, no almond smell, Miss Marple noted with relief. "Eleanor, dear," she said, her voice gentle. "May I join you? A chat might do us both good." Her smile was kind, but her eyes were sharp, watching Eleanor's pale face, her trembling hands. "Oh, Jane," Eleanor said, her voice thin. "Please sit. I'm so glad you're here. This house, it's falling apart." She gestured to a chair, her handkerchief fluttering like a trapped bird. Miss Marple sat, her handbag in her lap, her posture straight but her manner soft, like a St. Mary Mead neighbor offering comfort. "It's a hard time, dear," Miss Marple said, pouring herself tea from a fresh pot the maid had brought. "Families get shaken by trouble, but they come through. I've seen it in my village." Her words were warm, but her mind was cold. thinking of the locket, Clara's face, Sylvia's fear. Tell me, how are you holding up? Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Barely, Jane. First Reginald's death, then Mr. Vance, now Beatrice nearly. It's too much, and the will, Sylvia inheriting, it's made everyone so angry. Her voice broke and she dabbed her eyes. Charles feels betrayed. Beatrice is furious. Roland's acting strange. And Sylvia, poor Sylvia, she's terrified. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes on Eleanor's hands, twisting the handkerchief into knots. Sylvia's young to carry such a burden, she said. The codicil was a surprise, wasn't it? Did Sir Reginald ever mention why he chose her? Her tone was light, but her question was sharp, probing for the truth behind Sylvia's inheritance. Eleanor's hands froze. No, not really. Reginald loved Sylvia in his way. She came to us so young after her parents died. He treated her like a daughter, but he never said why he'd changed the will. Her eyes darted away, and Miss Marple noted it, like a saint. Mary Mead woman who'd hidden a secret about her son's theft. Curious, Miss Marple said, sipping her tea. Sylvia mentioned something yesterday about Reginald's first wife, Clara. Said she disappeared. Do you know anything about that? Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were fixed on Eleanor's face, watching for the smallest flinch. Eleanor's cup rattled in its saucer. Clara? Oh, that was so long ago. She left, I think. Reginald didn't talk about her. It was before my time. Her words were quick, too quick, and Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump. Eleanor was lying, or at least hiding something, like a St. Mary Mead widow who'd covered for her husband's debts. I see, Miss Marple said, smiling. Old stories can stir up trouble, can't they? Like in my village, when a woman was blamed for a theft she didn't do. Everyone pointed at her, but the real culprit was closer to home. She paused, her eyes soft but piercing. It made me think. Someone here might be pointing at Sylvia to hide their own guilt. Eleanor's face went paler. You think someone's framing Sylvia for the poisonings? Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind sharp. It's possible, dear, she said. In St. Mary Mead there was a case much like this. A young girl, quiet like Sylvia, was blamed for poisoning a neighbor's tea. Everyone turned on her, her family, the village, because she'd been seen near the kitchen. But I noticed something small. The girl's hands shook when she poured tea, not from guilt, but fear. She'd seen someone else near the teapot, someone nobody suspected, a cousin, loud and charming, who laughed too much to cover his lies. Miss Marple's voice was calm, but her eyes watched Eleanor's reaction, noting the way her fingers tightened on the handkerchief. That's awful, Eleanor whispered, but Sylvia, she wouldn't hurt anyone. She's gentle like a lamb. Her eyes were wet, but there was something else there, a flicker of guilt. Miss Marple's mind raced, thinking of the locket, Clara's face, Sylvia's resemblance. Eleanor knew more about Clara, she was sure, and it was tied to the codicil. You're right, dear, Miss Marple said. Sylvia seems gentle, but fear can make people do strange things, like hide a bundle in a garden. She let the words hang, her eyes on Eleanor's face. The older woman froze, her breath catching, and Miss Marple knew she'd struck a nerve. Eleanor had seen something or knew about the bundle, but she wasn't ready to talk. I don't know what you mean, Eleanor said, her voice faint. She stood, her handkerchief falling to the floor. I need to rest, Jane. Excuse me. She hurried out, her steps unsteady, leaving Miss Marple alone with her tea. Miss Marple leaned back, her mind spinning. Eleanor's lie was clear, like a loose stitch in a scarf. The locket, the bundle, the note about the rose garden, they all pointed to Clara, and Clara pointed to Sylvia. In St. Mary Mead, the girl in her story had been framed by a cousin who wanted her inheritance. Here, she thought, someone might be doing the same to Sylvia, and Eleanor's fear suggested she knew who or why. She slipped to the library, her stepped soft on the marble floor, wanting to check the scratched table again. The room was empty, the air heavy with dust and old books. She tapped the wall behind the shelves, listening for a hollow sound, but found none. The scratch, though, was deep, like a safe had been moved. She made a mental note to ask Mary, the maid, about hidden safes. In her village, a scratched desk once hid a stolen will. Voices came from the hall, Charles and Beatrice arguing again, their words sharp through the walls. "Sylvia's got to go," Charles hissed. "She's the key to this mess." Beatrice's reply was cold. "Then make it happen, Charles, before we lose everything." Miss Marple's imaginary needles clicked faster. Threats were dangerous, and Charles's anger was a thread she'd pull later. She went to the garden, the air cool and damp, the roses bright but the wild corner dark. The cloth bundle was still there, untouched under the thorny bush. She didn't disturb it. Harrow needed to see it, but she noted its shape, small and hard like the locket. The fountain nearby gleamed, its water clear, but the memory of the locket's discovery made her pause. Clara's face, Sylvia's fear, the cyanide, they were all tied to this garden, she thought. Back inside, she saw Roland in the hall, his red face sweaty, his boots muddy. "Out poking around again, Miss Marple?" he said, his voice loud but his eyes cold. "Careful, those roses have thorns." His laugh was forced, and Miss Marple smiled, her face mild, but her mind sharp. Roland's lies, clean boots the night, of Vance's death, muddy now, were a clue, like a St. Mary Mead man who'd lied about his alibi. By evening, Inspector Harrow gathered everyone in the dining room, his notebook open. "Beatrice's tea had cyanide, same as Vance's glass," he said, his mustache twitching. "Someone's targeting this family. I need to know who was near that teapot." Sylvia repeated her story about fetching sugar. Charles and Beatrice claimed they were in the library. Roland said the stables. Miss Marple listened, her eyes on their hands, their lies. Sylvia's trembling, Roland's fidgeting, Eleanor's silence. They all told a story. Harrow turned to her. "Miss Marple, you're quiet, got any thoughts?" His voice was gruff, but he respected her knack for seeing what others missed. "Just small things, Inspector," she said, smiling. "People show their truth in little ways, like a village girl I knew, blamed for a crime she didn't do. She didn't mention the locket or the bundle, not yet. Harrow was thorough, but she needed the full pattern." The night settled over the manor, heavy and dark. Miss Marple sat by her window, the rose garden below a shadow of thorns. The locket, the note, the cyanide, they were threads in a scarf, and Clara's disappearance was the needle. In St. Mary Mead, a framed girl led to a killer's mistake. Here, Miss Marple thought, Sylvia's fear might do the same, if she could pull the right thread before another tragedy struck. Chapter 10. The Hidden Passage. The morning sun crept through the mist, casting a pale glow over Willow Manor's rose garden. Miss Jane Marple stood at her window in the blue room, her small hands adjusting her pink cardigan, her sharp eyes scanning the wild corner where thorns hid Sylvia's cloth bundle. Her black handbag sat on the bedside table, heavy with clues. The locket with Clara's photograph, the note reading, "The truth lies in the rose garden," the scrap with Sylvia's name. Beatrice's near-fatal poisoning yesterday, with the same almond smell as Vance's death, had tightened the knot of secrets. Miss Marple's imaginary knitting needles clicked in her mind, weaving together Charles's anger, Beatrice's cold eyes, Sylvia's fear, Roland's lies, and Eleanor's guilt. In St. Mary Mead, she'd learned that a second crime often revealed the first, and Willow Manor, she sensed, was hiding a path to the truth. The manor was quiet, its halls heavy with suspicion. Lady Eleanor Grayson stayed in her room, her silver hair loose, her handkerchief twisted from worry. Charles and Beatrice were in the dining room, their voices low but sharp. Sylvia hid upstairs, her door closed since the accusations over the poisoned tea. Roland paced the garden, his red face grim, his muddy boots avoiding the wild corner. Inspector Harrow and his constable were in the east wing, examining the teapot, their boots echoing through the walls. Miss Marple slipped on her black shoes, tucked her handbag under her arm and headed downstairs, her steps soft but sure. The hidden passage she suspected, hinted by the scratched table in the library, might explain how Vance's killer entered his locked room. In her village, a hidden door once solved a murder, and she meant to find one here. The dining room was tense, the air thick with unspoken words. Charles sat at the table, his dark hair messy, his fingers tapping. Beatrice, pale but recovering, sipped water, her green dress dull in the morning light. Eleanor stood by the window, her eyes distant. Sylvia was absent, and Miss Marple noted it, her mind on the girl's fear and the scrap with her name. She poured tea from a fresh pot, checked. For the almond smell, none, and sat, her face mild but her eyes sharp. "Good morning, dear," she said to Eleanor, her voice gentle. "Any news?" Eleanor shook her head, her handkerchief twisting. "Just more questions from Harrow. He's sure it's one of us, Jane. It's awful." Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind on Eleanor's lie about Clara. Secrets, she thought, were like loose stitches. Pull one, and the scarf unraveled. Charles looked up, his eyes hard. "Harrow's wasting time. Sylvia made that tea, she's the one to watch." Beatrice nodded, her lips thin. "She's too quiet, Charles. Hiding something." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her heart steady but her thoughts racing. Blaming Sylvia was easy, but too easy. Like a St. Mary Mead case where a quiet girl was framed to hide a louder crime. She excused herself, her handbag light in her hand, and slipped to the library, the air heavy with dust and old books. The oak table's scratch nagged at her, a sign of something moved, a safe perhaps, or a panel. She tapped the walls behind the shelves, her knuckles soft, listening for a hollow sound. Nothing at first, but near the fireplace a faint echo answered. She pressed the panel, her fingers careful, and felt it shift. A narrow door, hidden in the woodwork, clicked open, revealing a dark passage. Her heart jumped, but her face stayed, calm. In St. Mary Mead, a vicarage passage once led to a killer's escape. Here, it might lead to Vance's death. The passage was narrow, smelling of damp stone and dust. Miss Marple stepped inside, her small frame fitting easily, her handbag clutched tight. The path sloped down, then up, ending at a panel in another wall. She pushed it and it opened into Vance's room in the east wing, near the bed where he'd died. The almond smell lingered, faint but sharp. She looked around, noting the locked window, the untouched bed, the desk now bare. The passage explained how the killer entered. No forced lock, no broken glass. She closed the panel, her mind racing. In her village, a hidden door hid a thief's path. Here, it hid a murderer's. She returned to the library, her steps slow, her thoughts fast. The passage was a clue, but who knew about it? Charles with his anger? Beatrice with her cold eyes? Roland with his lies? Or Sylvia, whose name was on that scrap? Eleanor perhaps hiding Clara's truth? Miss Marple sat at the table, her handbag open, the locket's weight heavy. Clara's face, Sylvia's resemblance, the rose garden note, they were all tied. To this passage, she thought. Voices came from the hall, Roland, loud and brash, talking to the gardener. "Keep those roses trimmed," he barked. But his voice was strained, like a St. Mary Mead man who shouted to hide his fear. Miss Marple slipped to the window, watching him pace near the wild corner, his eyes avoiding the thorny bush where Sylvia's bundle lay. He knew something, she thought, his muddy boots a contrast to the clean ones he'd claimed the night Vance died. She went to the garden, the air cool and damp, the roses bright but the wild corner dark. The cloth bundle was still there, untouched under the thorns. She didn't disturb it. Harrow needed to see it, but its shape nagged at her, like the locket. The fountain nearby gleamed, its water cold, reminding her of Clara's photograph. She thought of Sylvia's story, Clara's disappearance, Reginald's sadness, the codicil. The passage, the locket, the bundle. They were threads in a scarf, and the killer was pulling them tight. Back inside, she found Sylvia in the hall, her brown curls messy, her eyes red. "Miss Marple," she whispered. "They all think I poisoned Beatrice. I didn't. I swear." Her hands trembled, and Miss Marple patted her arm, her mind sharp. "I believe you, dear," she said, her voice gentle. "But tell me, do you know about any hidden passages in the manor? Old houses often have them." Her eyes watched Sylvia's face, looking for a flinch. Sylvia's eyes widened. "Passages? I heard stories as a child about secret ways in the walls. Uncle Reginald said they were for hiding during old wars, but I never found one." Her voice was honest, but her fear was real, like a St. Mary Mead girl who'd stumbled on a thief's secret. "Thank you, dear," Miss Marple said, smiling. "Don't worry, the truth comes out, like a stain you can't scrub." She didn't mention the passage, not yet. Sylvia was scared, but was she hiding something or just a target? By evening, Inspector Harrow called everyone to the dining room, his notebook open. "The teapot had cyanide, same as Vance's glass," he said, his mustache twitching. "Someone's playing a deadly game. I need to know who was in the kitchen yesterday." Sylvia repeated her story about fetching sugar. Charles and Beatrice claimed the library. Roland said the stables. Miss Marple listened, her eyes on Roland's muddy boots, his loud voice, Sylvia's trembling hands. The passage, she thought, changed everything. Someone had used it to reach Vance, and maybe Beatrice's tea. Harrow turned to her. "Miss Marple, you're quiet. Got any ideas?" His voice was gruff, but he knew her reputation from a St. Mary Mead case where she'd spotted a killer's mistake. "Just small things, Inspector," she said, smiling. "Old houses have secrets, like my village vicarage where a hidden door led to a truth nobody expected." She didn't mention the passage or the locket, not yet. Harrow was thorough, but she needed the full pattern. The night fell heavy, the manor creaking with secrets. Miss Marple sat by her window, the rose garden dark below, the wild corner a shadow of thorns. The locket, the note, the passage, the cyanide. They were all threads, and Clara's disappearance was the needle. In St. Mary Mead, a hidden door once led to a killer. Here, Miss Marple thought, it might do the same, if she could pull the right thread before another tragedy struck. Chapter 11. Roland's Deception. The morning mist clung to Willow Manor, wrapping the rose garden in a gray veil. Miss Jane Marple stood at her window in the blue room, her small hands smoothing her pink cardigan, her sharp eyes fixed on the wild corner where Sylvia's cloth bundle lay hidden. Her black handbag sat heavy on the bedside table, holding the locket with Clara's photograph, the note reading, "The truth lies in the rose garden," and the scrap with Sylvia's name. The hidden passage from the library to Vance's room, discovered yesterday, had tightened the knot of secrets, linking the almond-scented poisonings of Harold Vance and Beatrice to a killer who moved unseen. Miss Marple's imaginary knitting. Needles clicked in her mind, weaving together Charles's anger, Beatrice's cold eyes, Sylvia's fear, Roland's lies, and Eleanor's guilt. In St. Mary Mead, a false alibi once unraveled a murder, and she sensed Roland's clean boots the night of Vance's death, despite his claim of being in the muddy garden, were a thread ready to pull. The manor was hushed, its halls heavy with fear. Lady Eleanor Grayson stayed in her room, her silver hair loose, her handkerchief twisted from worry. Charles and Beatrice were in the dining room, their voices sharp but low, Beatrice still weak from her poisoning. Sylvia hid upstairs, her door closed since the accusations over the poisoned tea. Roland was outside, his red face grim, his boots now muddy as he paced the garden paths, avoiding the wild corner. Inspector Harrow and his constable were in the east wing, combing through Vance's papers, their boots echoing. Miss Marple slipped on her black shoes, tucked her handbag under her arm, and headed downstairs, her steps soft but sure. Roland's lie nagged at her, and she meant to confront it, carefully, like a St. Mary Mead case where a shopkeeper's false alibi led to his downfall. The dining room was tense, the air thick with suspicion. Charles sat at the table, his dark hair messy, his fingers drumming. Beatrice, pale but upright, sipped water, her green dress dull in the dim light. Eleanor stood by the window, her eyes distant, her handkerchief a crumpled knot. Sylvia was absent, and Miss Marple noted it, her mind on the girl's fear and the scrap with her name. She poured tea from a fresh pot. No almond smell, she checked, and sat, her face mild but her eyes sharp. "Good morning, dear," she said to Eleanor, her voice gentle. "Any news from Inspector Harrow?" Eleanor shook her head, her voice thin. "He's still searching, Jane. Says the cyanide came from somewhere in the house, but he can't find it. This place, it's cursed." Her hands trembled, and Miss Marple patted her arm, her mind on Eleanor's lie about Clara, the vanished wife. Secrets, she thought, were like weeds. Pull one and another grew. Charles looked up, his eyes hard. "Harrow's wasting time. Sylvia's the key. She made that tea, and now she's hiding." Beatrice nodded, her lips thin. "She's too quiet, Charles. She knows something." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her heart steady but her thoughts racing. Blaming Sylvia was a pattern, like a St. Mary Mead case where a quiet girl was framed to hide a louder crime. She excused herself, her handbag light in her hand, and slipped outside, the air cool and damp. The rose garden was quiet. The roses, bright but the wild corner dark with thorns. She checked the cloth bundle, still there untouched, and noted the fountain where she'd found the locket. Clara's face, Sylvia's resemblance, the note. They were all tied to this garden, she thought. But Roland's lie was her focus now. His clean boots the night of Vance's death, when the garden was muddy, didn't add up. She needed to talk, to him, to see his eyes when he answered. She found him near the stables, his red face sweaty, his muddy boots pacing the gravel. "Mr. Roland," she called, her voice gentle but firm. "A word if you don't mind." Her smile was kind, but her eyes were sharp like a St. Mary Mead neighbor who'd caught a liar. Roland stopped, his laugh forced. "Miss Marple, out for a stroll? Careful, the ground's slick." His voice was loud, but his eyes were cold and his hands twitched in his pockets. Miss Marple noted it, her mind on a shopkeeper in her village who'd fidgeted the same way, before confessing to theft. "I was thinking about the night Mr. Vance died," she said, her tone light, as if chatting about the weather. "You said you were in the garden smoking, but your boots were so clean. No mud at all. Curious, don't you think, for a muddy night?" Her eyes met his, soft but piercing. Roland's face froze, his laugh dying. "Clean? Well, I'm careful, that's all. Wipe my boots before coming in." His words were quick, his hands twitching faster. Miss Marple smiled, her heart quickening but her face calm. A lie, she thought. Like a St. Mary Mead man who'd claimed he was home when he wasn't. "Careful indeed," she said. "But the garden's quite wet, isn't it? Hard to stay spotless." She paused, watching his eyes dart to the wild corner, then away. "The rose garden's lovely, though, especially that wild bit. Do you ever go there?" Roland's face reddened further. "That tangle? No, too thorny. I stick to the paths." His voice was loud, but his eyes betrayed him, flicking to the bush where Sylvia's bundle lay. Miss Marple's mind raced. He knew something about the garden, or the bundle, or both. In her village, a man's glance once led to a hidden stash of stolen coins. "Thank you, Mr. Roland," she said, smiling. "Just curious." She turned back to the manor, feeling his eyes on her back. Roland's lie was unraveling, and the passage from the library to Vance's room made his alibi shakier. Someone had used that passage to poison Vance, and Roland's clean boots suggested he wasn't where he said. Inside she found Mary, the maid, in the hall, her apron twisted, her eyes nervous. "Mary, dear," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle. "Do you know of any old passages in the manor? Houses like this often have them." Her eyes watched the girl's face, looking for a flinch. Mary's hands froze. "Passages? I heard—" "Stories, miss, from the old staff. Said there's ways in the walls from long ago, but I never seen 'em." Her voice was honest, but her eyes were scared, like a St. Mary Mead girl who'd seen a thief but wouldn't tell. "Thank you, dear," Miss Marple said, smiling. She didn't mention the passage she'd found. Not yet. Mary was nervous, and pushing too hard could scare her off. Instead, she went to the library, the air heavy with dust and old books. She checked the hidden panel by the fireplace, her fingers careful. It was still there, the passage dark and damp. She didn't enter. Harrow needed to know first, but its existence was a clue, tying the locked room to the killer's path. Voices came from the dining room, Charles and Beatrice, arguing again. "Sylvia's the problem," Charles hissed. "She's got the manor and now this poisoning nonsense." Beatrice's reply was cold. "Then deal with her, Charles, before it's too late." Miss Marple's imaginary needles clicked faster. Threats were dangerous, and Charles's anger was a loose thread like Roland's lie. By evening, Inspector Harrow gathered everyone in the drawing room, his notebook open. "We're no closer to the cyanide source," he said, his mustache twitching. "But the passage Miss Marple found changes things. Someone used it to get to Vance, maybe Beatrice too. I need alibis again. Where were you the night Vance died?" Sylvia repeated her story of walking the hall. Charles and Beatrice claimed their room. Roland stuck to his garden tale. Miss Marple listened, her eyes on Roland's fidgeting hands, his red face, his lie. Harrow turned to her. "Miss Marple, you found that passage. Anything else?" His voice was gruff, but he respected her knack for seeing what others missed. "Just small things, Inspector," she said, smiling. "People's stories don't always match their shoes, like a shopkeeper in my village who lied about his whereabouts." She didn't mention Roland's boots or the locket, not yet. Harrow was thorough, but she needed the full pattern. The night fell heavy, the manor creaking with secrets. Miss Marple sat by her window, the rose garden dark below, the wild corner a tangle of thorns. The locket, the note, the passage, the cyanide. They were all threads, and Roland's lie was a loose one. In St. Mary Mead, a false alibi once led to a killer. Here, Miss Marple thought, it might do the same, if she could pull the right thread before another tragedy struck. Chapter 12. The Shocking Discovery. The morning light spilled through the tall windows of Willow Manor, painting the drawing room in soft gold. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cushioned chair, her small hands folded over her black handbag, her pink cardigan neat despite the restless night. Her sharp eyes, bright as ever, watched the rose garden through the glass, its wild corner of thorns hiding Sylvia's cloth bundle. Her handbag held the locket with Clara's photograph, the note reading, "The truth lies in the rose garden," and the scrap with Sylvia's name. The hidden passage from the library to Vance's room, Roland's crumbling alibi, and the cyanide. Poisonings of Harold Vance and Beatrice wove a tight pattern in her mind. Her imaginary knitting needles clicked, stitching together Charles's anger, Beatrice's cold eyes, Sylvia's fear, Roland's lies, and Eleanor's guilt. In St. Mary Mead, a secret about a family's past once solved a murder, and Miss Marple sensed Willow Manor's truth was close, tied to Clara's disappearance and Sylvia's inheritance. The manor was quiet, but it was the quiet of a storm about to break. Lady Eleanor Grayson was in her room, her silver hair loose, her handkerchief twisted from worry. Charles and Beatrice were in the dining room, their voices low but sharp, Beatrice still weak from her poisoning. Sylvia stayed upstairs, her door closed, avoiding the accusations over the poisoned tea. Roland paced the garden, his red face grim, his muddy boots steering clear of the wild corner. Inspector Harrow and his constable were in the east wing, searching for the cyanide source, their voices muffled through the walls. Miss Marple slipped on her black shoes, tucked her handbag under her arm, and headed downstairs, her steps soft but sure. The locket's photograph, Clara, so like Sylvia, nagged at her, and she meant to unravel its secret today. The dining room was tense, the air heavy with suspicion. Charles sat at the table, his dark hair messy, his fingers drumming. Beatrice, pale but upright, sipped water, her green dress faded in the morning light. Eleanor stood by the window, her eyes distant, her handkerchief a crumpled knot. Sylvia was absent, and Miss Marple noted it, her mind on the girl's fear and the scrap with her name. She poured tea from a fresh pot, no almond smell, she checked, and sat, her face mild but her eyes sharp. "Good morning, dear," she said to Eleanor, her voice gentle. How are you holding up? Eleanor's hands trembled. Barely, Jane. This house, it's tearing us apart. First Vance, then Beatrice, and that codicil. It's a curse. Her voice broke, and Miss Marple patted her arm, her mind on Eleanor's lie about Clara. Secrets, she thought, were like loose stitches. Pull one, and the scarf unraveled. Charles looked up, his eyes hard. Sylvia's at the center of this, he said. She made that tea, and now she's hiding. Guilty, if you ask me. Beatrice nodded, her lips thin. She's too quiet, Charles. Hiding something. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her heart steady but her thoughts racing. Blaming Sylvia was a pattern, like a St. Mary Mead case where a quiet girl was framed to hide a louder crime. She excused herself, her handbag light in her hand, and slipped to the library, the air heavy with dust and old books. The hidden passages, panel by the fireplace was still there, its secret safe for now. She wanted to check the scratched table again, but voices outside stopped her. Roland was in the garden, shouting at the gardener about the roses. Keep that wild corner clear. He barked, but his voice was strained like a St. Mary Mead man who shouted to hide his fear. Miss Marple watched from the window, noting his muddy boots, his eyes avoiding the thorny bush where Sylvia's bundle lay. She decided to talk to Sylvia, to press her about the locket and Clara. She climbed the stairs, her steps slow, and knocked on Sylvia's door. The girl opened it, her brown curls messy, her eyes red. Miss Marple, she whispered, I can't stay here, they all think I'm a poisoner. Her hands trembled, and Miss Marple stepped inside, her voice gentle. Don't fret, dear, she said, sitting on a chair, her handbag in her lap. I found something in the garden, a locket with a woman's picture. She looks like you. Do you know who she might be? Her eyes watched Sylvia's face, looking for a flinch. Sylvia's. Breath caught, her eyes wide. A locket? Uncle Reginald gave me one years ago, said it was my mother's. I lost it in the garden when I was small, but I don't know her face. She died when I was a baby. Her voice was honest, but her fear was real, like a St. Mary Mead girl who'd stumbled on a secret she didn't understand. Miss Marple's heart jumped. Your mother? She said, her tone light. That's curious, the picture looks so like you. And Clara, Reginald's first wife, did he ever mention her? She leaned forward, her eyes sharp, but her face kind. Sylvia shook her head. No, never. Aunt Eleanor said Clara left before I came here, but Uncle Reginald was sad when he looked at me like I reminded him of someone. Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple's mind raced. The locket, Sylvia's resemblance, the codicil. It was clear now. Sylvia was Clara's daughter, not just a niece, and Reginald's codicil protected her inheritance. But why hide it? And why was Clara gone? Thank you, dear, Miss Marple said, standing. You've been very brave. Stay strong. The truth comes out like a stain you can't hide. She left, her thoughts spinning. Sylvia was Clara's daughter, she was sure, and Eleanor knew it. The locket, the note, the passage, the poisonings, they all pointed to a secret kept to protect Sylvia, or to destroy her. She went to Eleanor's room, knocking softly. Eleanor opened the door, her face pale, her silver hair loose. Jane, she said, her voice thin. I can't take much more. This house is breaking me. She gestured to a chair, and Miss Marple sat, her handbag heavy with the locket. Eleanor, dear, Miss Marple said, her voice gentle. I found a locket in the garden, with a photograph of a woman who looks like Sylvia. I think it's Clara, Reginald's first wife, and I think Sylvia is her daughter, not just your niece. Am I right? Her eyes were soft but piercing, watching Eleanor's face. Eleanor's hands froze, her handkerchief falling. Jane, how did you? Her voice broke and tears spilled down her cheeks. Yes, it's true. Sylvia is Clara's daughter. Reginald told me years ago when Clara disappeared. He swore me to secrecy, to protect Sylvia. Clara didn't run off. She's alive, hidden away because of a scandal. Reginald changed the will to give Sylvia the estate to make up for it. Her words came fast, like a dam breaking, and Miss Marple listened, her heart steady but her thoughts racing. "A scandal?" she said, her tone light. "What kind, dear?" Eleanor shook her head. "I can't say, Jane. It's too painful. But Sylvia doesn't know. She thinks her parents died in a crash. We kept it from her for her safety." Her eyes were wet, and Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind on the codicil, the poisonings, the passage. Someone else knew, she thought, and wanted Sylvia out of the way. "Thank you, dear," Miss Marple said, standing. "You've done right to tell me. The truth will help Sylvia, not hurt her." She didn't mention the bundle or the passage. Not yet. Eleanor was fragile, and Miss Marple needed the full pattern. By evening, Inspector Harrow gathered everyone in the drawing room, his notebook open. "We've found no cyanide yet, but the passage changes things," he said, his mustache twitching. "Someone used it to reach Vance, maybe Beatrice. I need alibis again." Sylvia repeated her hall-walking story. Charles and Beatrice claimed. Their room. Roland stuck to the garden, his boots muddy now but clean then. Miss Marple listened, her eyes on Roland's fidgeting hands, Eleanor's tears, Sylvia's fear. Harrow turned to her. "Miss Marple, you found that passage. Anything else?" His voice was gruff, but he respected her knack for seeing what others missed. "Just small things, Inspector," she said, smiling. "Families hide secrets, like a St. Mary Mead woman who hid her daughter's truth to save her." She didn't mention Sylvia's parentage or the locket, not yet. Harrow was thorough, but she needed the full scarf. The night fell heavy, the manor creaking with secrets. Miss Marple sat by her window, the rose garden dark below, the wild corner a tangle of thorns. The locket, the note, the passage. Sylvia's truth. They were all threads, and Clara's secret was the needle. In St. Mary Mead, a hidden child once led to a killer. Here, Miss Marple thought, Sylvia's parentage might do the same if she could pull the right thread before another tragedy struck. Chapter 13. The Trap is Set. The morning mist swirled around Willow Manor, cloaking the rose garden in a soft gray haze. Miss Jane Marple stood at her window in the blue room, her small hands adjusting her pink cardigan, her sharp eyes fixed on the wild corner where Sylvia's cloth bundle lay hidden beneath thorny bushes. Her black handbag sat on the bedside table, heavy with clues. The locket with Clara's photograph, the note reading, "The truth lies in the rose garden," and the scrap with Sylvia's name. The hidden passage from the library to Harold Vance's room, Roland's crumbling alibi with his clean boots, and the cyanide poisonings of Vance and Beatrice had woven a tight pattern in her mind. Sylvia's true parentage, Clara's daughter, not just a niece, had unraveled a key thread revealing a family secret tied to the codicil and the murders. Miss Marple's imaginary knitting needles clicked, stitching together Charles's anger, Beatrice's cold eyes, Sylvia's fear, Roland's lies, and Eleanor's guilt. In St. Mary Mead, a trap once caught a killer, and today Miss Marple planned to set one here, to pull the final thread and expose the truth. The manor was quiet, its halls heavy with suspicion. Lady Eleanor Grayson stayed in her room, her silver, hair loose, her handkerchief twisted from the weight of Sylvia's secret. Charles and Beatrice were in the dining room, their voices sharp but low, Beatrice still weak from her poisoning. Sylvia hid upstairs, her door closed, avoiding the accusations that she'd poisoned the tea. Roland paced the garden, his red face grim, his muddy boots avoiding the wild corner where the bundle lay. Inspector Harrow and his constable were in the east wing, still searching for the cyanide source, their boots echoing through the walls. Miss Marple slipped on her black shoes, tucked her handbag under her arm, and headed downstairs, her steps soft but sure. Roland's lie, clean boots the night Vance died despite a muddy garden, pointed to him, and the passage made his access to Vance possible. She needed to catch him, and a trap, she thought, was the way. The dining room was tense, the air thick with unspoken words. Charles sat at the table, his dark hair messy, his fingers drumming. Beatrice, pale but upright, sipped water, her green dress faded in the dim light. Eleanor stood by the window, her eyes distant, her handkerchief a crumpled knot. Sylvia was absent, and Miss Marple noted it, her mind on the girl's fear and her true parentage. She poured tea from a fresh pot. No almond smell, she checked, and sat, her face mild but her eyes sharp. "Good morning, dear," she said to Eleanor, her voice gentle. "Any news from Inspector Harrow?" Eleanor shook her head, her voice thin. "He's still looking for the poison, Jane. Says it's in the house somewhere, this place, and it's tearing us apart." Her hands trembled and Miss Marple patted her arm, her mind on Eleanor's confession about Sylvia being Clara's daughter. Secrets, she thought, were like loose stitches. Pull one and the scarf unraveled. Charles looked up, his eyes hard. "Sylvia's the problem," he said. "She's got the manor and now these poisonings. She's guilty, I'd bet." Beatrice nodded, her lips thin. "Too quiet, Charles. She's hiding something." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her heart steady but her thoughts racing. Blaming Sylvia was a pattern, like a St. Mary Mead case where a quiet girl was framed to hide a louder crime. But Roland's lie, she thought, was the key. She excused herself, her handbag light in her hand, and found Inspector Harrow in the library, his notebook open, the hidden passages panel ajar. "Miss Marple," he said, his mustache twitching, "this passage of yours is a game changer. Someone used it to get to Vance, maybe Beatrice too. Got any other finds?" His voice was gruff, but he respected her knack for seeing what others missed. "Just small things, Inspector," she said, smiling. "But I've an idea. In my village, we once caught a thief by letting him think he was safe. Suppose we announce Sylvia's giving up the inheritance. It might flush out the real culprit." Her eyes were soft but sharp, watching Harrow's face. The trap, she thought, would draw the killer, and Roland's lie made him her target. Harrow's eyes narrowed. "A trap? Risky, but it could work. I'll need to be there, and my men, if someone moves, will catch them." He nodded, and Miss Marple felt a spark of hope. In St. Mary Mead, a trap had caught a killer who thought his secret was safe. Here it might do the same. She went to Eleanor, explaining the plan in whispers, her voice gentle but firm. "We'll say Sylvia's renouncing the will, dear. It'll stir things up, and the guilty one might show their hand. Will you help?" Eleanor's face paled, but she nodded, her eyes wet. "For Sylvia," she whispered, "to keep her safe." By evening, Harrow gathered everyone in the drawing room. The air thick with tension. The family sat in a tight circle. Charles, his face red with anger. Beatrice, her eyes cold. Sylvia, her brown curls messy, her hands trembling. Roland, his red face grim, his boots muddy. Eleanor, her handkerchief twisted. Miss Marple stood, by the fireplace, her handbag in her lap, her face mild but her eyes sharp. Harrow cleared his throat. "We've news," he said, his voice steady. "Miss Sylvia has decided to renounce her inheritance. She doesn't want the manor or the estate. It'll go to the next in line per the codicil, Mr. Roland." He paused, his eyes moving from face to face. Miss Marple watched, her heart quick, but her face calm. The trap was set, and the killer, she thought, would bite. Charles's jaw dropped. "Renounce it? Why?" His voice was loud, his eyes on Sylvia, who shrank back. Beatrice's lips parted, her eyes narrowing. Roland froze, his red face pale, his hands twitching. Sylvia looked confused, her eyes flicking to Miss Marple, who nodded slightly, reassuring her. Eleanor's hands shook, her handkerchief falling. "It's her choice," Harrow said. "We'll handle the paperwork tomorrow. For now, everyone stay put." He left, his constable at the door, but Miss Marple stayed, her eyes on Roland. His reaction, pale, twitching, told her he was nervous, like a St. Mary Mead man who'd panicked when his theft was exposed. The family dispersed, their voices low and tense. Miss Marple slipped to the dining room where a fresh tea tray sat for the evening. She watched from the hall, her small frame hidden by a curtain. Roland entered, his steps quick, his eyes darting to the teapot. He glanced around, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a small vial, glass like the one under Vance's bed. Miss Marple's heart jumped. but she stayed still, her breath slow. Roland hesitated, his hand shaking, then poured a drop into Sylvia's cup, marked with her initials on the saucer. He slipped the vial back into his pocket and left, his boots quiet on the rug. Miss Marple moved fast, her small frame darting to the teapot. She sniffed the cup, almond, sharp, and deadly. She called Harrow, her voice low. "Inspector, come. Quick, it's Roland, he's poisoned Sylvia's cup." Harrow and his constable rushed in, their boots loud. They took the cup, the almond smell clear, and Harrow's face hardened. "We've got him," he said, his voice grim. They found Roland in the garden near the wild corner, his red face sweaty. Harrow grabbed him, his voice sharp. "Roland Grayson, you're under arrest for attempting to poison Sylvia Grayson and likely for Harold Vance's murder." Roland struggled, his loud voice protesting. "You've got no proof. I didn't do anything." But his pocket held the vial, its contents matching the cyanide in Vance's glass and Beatrice's tea. In the drawing room, Roland broke, his red face crumpling. "All right, I did it," he spat, his eyes cold. Vance was going to read the codicil. Sylvia. "Getting everything I was supposed to inherit, not her." I used the passage to get to his room, slipped cyanide in his glass. And Beatrice, she was poking around asking questions. I thought a small dose would scare her off. Sylvia was next. She had to go, or I'd lose it all. His voice was loud, but his hands shook like a St. Mary Mead man confessing to theft. Miss Marple listened, her face mild but her mind sharp. Roland's greed, his lie about the garden, his use of the passage, it all fit. The locket, Clara's secret, Sylvia's. Parentage, they were the motive, but Roland was the hand. In her village, a greedy cousin once killed for less. Harrow took Roland away, his hands cuffed, his loud voice silenced. The manor felt lighter, but not yet at peace. Miss Marple sat by her window, the rose garden dark below, the wild corner, still hiding the bundle. The locket, the note, Sylvia's truth. They were threads tied off, but one remained loose. In St. Mary Mead, a trap once caught a killer. Here it had done the same, but Miss Marple knew the final stitch was still to come. Chapter 14. The final stitch. The morning sun broke through the mist, bathing Willow Manor in a warm, golden glow. Miss Jane Marple sat by her window in the blue room, her small hands folded over her black handbag, her pink cardigan neat despite the long days of unraveling secrets. Her sharp eyes, bright as ever, gazed at the rose garden below, its wild corner of thorns no longer menacing but still hiding Sylvia's cloth bundle. Her handbag held the locket with Clara's photograph, the note reading "The truth lies in the rose garden," and the scrap with Sylvia's name, now pieces of a nearly complete pattern. Roland's arrest last night, caught in Miss Marple's trap for poisoning Sylvia's tea, had unraveled the murders of Harold Vance and the attempt on Beatrice. Sylvia's true parentage, Clara's daughter, hidden to protect her, had explained the codicil, but the bundle in the garden and Clara's fate remained loose threads. Miss Marple's imaginary knitting needles clicked, stitching together the final clues to bring peace to the manor. In St. Mary Mead, a last discovery often closed a case, and she sensed Willow Manor's truth was ready to emerge. The manor was calmer now, its halls lighter with Roland gone. Lady Eleanor Grayson was in the drawing room, her silver hair pinned neatly, her handkerchief still, but her eyes tired. Charles and Beatrice were in the dining room, their voices softer, Beatrice stronger after her recovery. Sylvia was downstairs at last, her brown curls tidy, her face less fearful. Inspector Harrow and his constable were packing up, their work. Nearly done, though Harrow wanted Miss Marple's final thoughts. She slipped on her black shoes, tucked her handbag under her arm, and headed downstairs, her steps soft but sure. The rose garden bundle, she thought, held the last secret, and Clara's story needed closure. The drawing room was warm, the fire crackling, the air free of the tension that had choked the house. Eleanor sat by the window, her hands still, her face softer. Sylvia stood near her, her eyes bright but wary. Miss Marple joined them, her smile gentle but her eyes sharp. Good morning, dear, she said to Eleanor, her voice kind. The house feels different today, doesn't it? Eleanor nodded, her voice steady. It's like a weight's lifted, Jane. Roland's gone and Sylvia's safe, but I still feel Clara's shadow. Her eyes flicked to Sylvia, then away, and Miss Marple noted it, her mind on the locket and Clara's photograph, so like Sylvia's face. It's natural, dear, Miss Marple said, sitting her handbag in her lap. Secrets leave shadows, but they fade in the light. Sylvia, you've been brave through this. Would you come with me to the garden? There's something we need to see. Her tone was gentle, but her eyes were firm, thinking of the cloth bundle, hidden in the wild corner. Sylvia's eyes widened, her hands twisting. The garden? All right, Miss Marple. Her voice was small, but she followed, Eleanor trailing behind, her handkerchief clutched tight. Miss Marple led them outside, the air cool and fresh, the gravel crunching under their shoes. The rose garden was bright, its red and yellow blooms sparkling with dew, but the wild corner was dark, its thorns sharp. She stopped by the thorny bush, her small frame steady and pointed to the ground. Sylvia, dear, you hid something here. It's time to show us. Sylvia's face paled, her breath catching. I didn't mean to hide anything bad. It was Uncle Reginald's. He gave it to me before he died, said to keep it safe. Her hands trembled and she knelt, her fingers digging under the bush. She pulled out the cloth bundle, a handkerchief tied with string, and handed it to Miss Marple, her eyes wet. I was scared after the codicil. I thought someone might take it. Miss Marple untied the string, her fingers careful, Eleanor and Sylvia watching, their breaths held. Inside was a small leather journal, its pages yellowed, and a sealed letter addressed to Sylvia in Sir Reginald's handwriting. Miss Marple's heart jumped, but her face stayed calm. In St. Mary Mead, a hidden letter once solved a theft, and she sensed this journal held the final truth. Let's take this inside, dear, she said, her voice gentle. Inspector Harrow should see it too. They returned to the drawing room where Harrow joined them, his gray mustache twitching, his notebook open. Charles and Beatrice entered, curious but quiet, their faces less hostile. Miss Marple handed the journal to Harrow, keeping the letter for Sylvia. This was hidden in the garden, she said, her voice clear. It's Sir Reginald's, and I believe it explains everything. Clara, the codicil, the murders. Harrow opened the journal, his eyes scanning the pages. It's a diary, he said, his voice gruff. Reginald's from years ago, talks about Clara, his first wife. He read aloud, his voice steady. Clara was my love, but her family's scandal, a brother's theft, a public shame, forced her to leave. She bore our daughter Sylvia in secret, and I sent her away to protect them. Sylvia came to us after. Clara's brother died, but Clara stayed hidden, safe in a cottage in Devon. I changed my will to give Sylvia the manor, to right my wrong. The room went still. Sylvia's gasp the only sound. Eleanor's hands shook, her eyes wet. It's true, she whispered. Reginald told me Clara was alive, but I swore to keep it secret. Sylvia was to know when she was older, but then Reginald died. Charles and Beatrice sat silent, their faces pale, their anger fading. Miss Marple watched, her heart steady but her thoughts racing. Clara's survival explained the codicil, but Roland's greed had turned it deadly. Sylvia took the letter, her hands trembling, and broke the seal. Her voice was small as she read. My dearest Sylvia, you are my daughter, Clara's child. I kept you safe by hiding the truth. Your mother lives in Devon, waiting for you. The manor is yours, to honor her. Forgive me. Your father, Reginald. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and Eleanor hugged her, their sobs soft in the quiet room. Miss Marple spoke, her voice gentle but clear. Roland knew some of this, I think. He expected the estate, but the codicil cut him out. He used the hidden passage to poison Vance, who carried the will, and tried to scare Beatrice, who asked too many questions. Sylvia was his final target, to clear his path. The rose garden note, Reginald's, I believe, led us to the journal, his last gift to Sylvia. Her eyes were sharp, tying the locket, the passage, the bundle, and the poisonings into a neat scarf. Harrow nodded, his mustache twitching. "You've done it again, Miss Marple. The journal's enough to close the case. Roland's confessed, and this explains his motive. Sylvia's safe, and Clara, we'll find her." His voice was gruff, but there was respect in his eyes, like a St. Mary Mead constable who'd learned to trust her. Charles cleared his throat, his voice low. "Sylvia, we were wrong. I'm sorry." Beatrice nodded, her eyes soft for the first time. "Your family," she said, her voice quiet. Sylvia smiled, her tears drying, and Miss Marple felt a warmth in her heart. Families, she thought, could mend, like a torn scarf stitched back together. The day passed in a blur of plans. Sylvia would visit Clara, guided by Harrow's men. Eleanor promised to help, her guilt easing. Charles and Beatrice offered to stay, to rebuild the Manor's future with Sylvia. Miss Marple sat by her window, the rose garden bright below, its wild corner now just a garden. The locket, the note, the journal, they were threads tied off, the pattern complete. In St. Mary Mead, a final letter once closed a murder case. Here, it had done the same, bringing truth and peace to Willow Manor. She packed her knitting, her needles still, and prepared to leave, her work done. The manor was quiet, but it was the quiet of healing, not fear. Miss Marple smiled, her sharp eyes soft, and thought of her village, where small things always led to big truths. Willow Manor, she knew, would be all right. Its secrets laid bare, its shadows gone. Chapter 15. A New Dawn. The afternoon sun bathed Willow Manor in a gentle glow, its rays filtering through the rose garden's vibrant blooms. Miss Jane Marple sat on a wrought iron bench near the garden's edge, her small hands folded over her black handbag, her pink cardigan neat despite the journey she'd soon undertake back to St. Mary Mead. Her sharp eyes, bright as ever, lingered on the wild corner, now trimmed and tidy, its thorny secrets laid bare. The cloth bundle, Sir Reginald's journal and Sylvia's letter, had unraveled the truth about Clara's survival, Sylvia's parentage, and Roland's murderous greed. The locket with Clara's photograph, the note reading, "The truth lies in the rose garden," and the scrap with Sylvia's name rested in her handbag. Mementos of a case solved. Her imaginary knitting needles were still, the scarf of clues complete. But her mind hummed with the Manor's newfound peace and a faint, new thread of curiosity. In St. Mary Mead, a case's end often brought quiet reflection. And here Miss Marple savored the calm before her departure. The Manor was alive with a soft hum of hope. Lady Eleanor Grayson stood on the terrace, her silver hair pinned neatly, her face lighter than it had been in days. Sylvia was inside packing for her trip to Devon to meet Clara, her mother, whose survival had been the case's final revelation. Charles and Beatrice were in the drawing room, their voices calm, planning repairs to the Manor's crumbling wings. Inspector Harrow had left that morning, his gray mustache twitching with satisfaction. Roland's confession and the journal, closing the case of Harold Vance's murder and Beatrice's poisoning. Miss Marple adjusted her handbag, her steps soft on the gravel as she walked toward the house, her heart steady, but her thoughts tracing the past week's shadows. The Manor, she thought, was healing, like a village after a storm. The drawing room was warm, the fire crackling, its light dancing on the polished wood. Eleanor greeted her with a smile, her handkerchief tucked away, her eyes bright. "Jane, you're a miracle," she said, her voice steady. "You've given us back, our home, our family. How can we thank you?" She gestured to a chair, and Miss Marple sat, her small frame settling comfortably, her handbag in her lap. "No thanks needed, dear," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle but her eyes sharp. "People show their truth in time, like a stain you can't scrub out. I only helped it along." Her mind flicked to St. Mary Mead, where a neighbor's kindness once hid a thief's guilt. Here kindness was real, and she felt its warmth. Sylvia entered, her brown curls tidy, her face glowing with nervous excitement. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice soft, "I'm leaving for Devon tomorrow. To meet my mother." Her eyes shone with tears, but they were happy ones, and Miss Marple patted her hand, her heart warming at the girl's courage. "You'll do wonderfully, dear," she said, her tone kind. "Clara's waited a long time for you, and you've the Manor to come back to, a home of your own." Her eyes met Sylvia's, seeing Clara's face in hers, the locket's photograph a quiet proof of their bond. In her village, a reunion once, healed a family torn by lies, and she sensed Sylvia's would do the same. Charles and Beatrice joined them, their faces softer, their earlier anger gone. "Sylvia," Charles said, his voice low, "we're staying to help with the Manor. It's yours, but it's ours too, in a way." Beatrice nodded, her green dress catching the firelight. "We were wrong to doubt you," she said, her voice quiet. "Your family." Sylvia smiled, her tears falling, and Miss Marple felt a spark of joy. Families, she thought, were like scarves, torn but mendable with care. Eleanor poured tea, the pot steaming, its scent clean and free of almonds. Miss Marple sipped, her eyes scanning the room, noting the small changes: a new vase, a polished table, a sense of life returning. "The Manor's strong," she said, her voice gentle. "It's seen secrets before and it'll see more, but you're stronger, all of you." Her mind flicked to the hidden passage, now sealed, and the rose garden note, now explained. The journal had been the key, Reginald's final gift to Sylvia, and Miss Marple was glad to have found it. Sylvia hesitated, then spoke, her voice small. "Miss Marple, there's something else. In the journal, Uncle, my father, mentioned a box, hidden in the Manor. He said it held Clara's things, proof of her life here. I want to find it for her." Her eyes were earnest, and Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump, her curiosity stirring. A new mystery, she thought, small but sharp, like a St. Mary Mead case where a hidden box revealed a lost love. "That's a fine idea, dear," Miss Marple said, smiling. "Old houses love their secrets. If you need help, you know where to find me." Her eyes twinkled, but her mind was already turning, thinking of scratched tables and hollow walls. The Manor's passage had been one surprise. A box might be another. Eleanor nodded, her face soft. "We'll look, Sylvia. Together. Clara deserves to be remembered." Her voice was steady, her guilt about hiding Clara's truth fading. Miss Marple watched, her heart steady, but her thoughts racing. The Manor was healing, but a box, she thought, could stir new ripples like a village secret that surfaced years later. The afternoon passed in quiet talk, the family planning Sylvia's trip and the Manor's future. Miss Marple listened, her knitting needle still in her mind, the scarf complete but a new thread dangling. She thought of St. Mary Mead, where her cottage waited, her garden blooming, her neighbors gossiping. Cases ended, but life went on, and she was ready to return, her work here done. As evening fell, she walked to the rose garden one last time, the air cool, the blooms bright. The wild corner was neat now, its thorns trimmed, its secrets gone. She stood by the fountain where she'd found the locket, and thought of Clara, Sylvia, Reginald. The journal, the letter, the codicil. They had tied the pattern, and Roland's greed had been the flaw. In her village, a garden once held a clue that solved a theft. Here it had held the truth, and she was glad to have pulled it free. Back inside, she packed her knitting, her needles tucked away, her handbag lighter without the weight of mystery. Eleanor and Sylvia saw her to the door, their faces grateful. "Come back, Jane," Eleanor said, her voice warm. "You're always welcome." Sylvia hugged her, her curls brushing Miss Marple's cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick. Miss Marple smiled, her sharp eyes soft. "Take care, dear, and write to me about that box." She stepped into the waiting car, Tom, the driver, tipping his cap, and the Manor faded behind her, its stone walls strong in the dusk. The road to St. Mary Mead stretched ahead, and she settled back, her mind calm but her curiosity alive. The box, she thought, was a small thread, but threads had a way of growing. In St. Mary Mead, a new case always waited, and Miss Marple, with her quiet ways and sharp eyes, was ready for it. Chapter 16. The Shadow Returns. The late morning sun cast a pale light over St. Mary Mead, its beams filtering through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cozy cottage. She sat in her armchair, her small hands folded over her black handbag, her pink cardigan neat despite the flurry of packing. Her sharp eyes, bright as ever, scanned a letter from Sylvia Grayson, delivered just hours ago, its words urgent and trembling. The peace of Willow Manor, restored after Roland's arrest for the cyanide poisonings of Harold Vance and Beatrice, had shattered. Sylvia wrote of a threatening letter, slipped under her door, warning her to leave the manor or face death. The letter hinted at secrets Roland hadn't shared, suggesting an accomplice still lurking. Miss Marple's imaginary knitting needles clicked, stirring the threads of the locket with Clara's photograph, the note reading, "The truth lies in the rose garden," and the hidden box Sir Reginald mentioned in his journal. In St. Mary Mead, a new clue often reopened a case, and she sensed Willow Manor needed her again. She tucked the letter into her handbag, alongside the locket, note, and scrap with Sylvia's name, and packed her knitting, her needles quiet but ready. The train to Willow Manor left at noon, and she moved with purpose, her small frame steady, her mind sharp. Sylvia's fear, Clara's survival in Devon, and the box's promise of proof nagged at her. Roland's confession had tied off the murders, but an accomplice, she thought, was a loose thread, like a St. Mary Mead case where a thief's partner, struck after the first, was caught. The train rattled through green fields, and Miss Marple gazed out the window, her thoughts on Willow Manor. The hidden passage from the library to Vance's room, Roland's clean boots the night of the murder, Sylvia's true parentage as Clara's daughter. They had woven a pattern, but the threatening letter suggested a missing stitch. She arrived by mid-afternoon, the manor's stone walls glowing in the sun, the rose garden bright but its wild corner still holding secrets. Sylvia met her at the door, her brown curls loose, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Miss Marple," Sylvia cried, hugging her tightly. "Thank you for coming. I didn't know who else to call." Her voice trembled, and she led Miss Marple inside, clutching a crumpled letter. Lady Eleanor Grayson waited in the drawing room, her silver hair neat, her hands twisting a handkerchief, her face etched with worry. Charles and Beatrice were there too, their expressions tense, their earlier warmth toward Sylvia cooled by the new threat. Miss Marple sat, her handbag in her lap, her smile gentle, but her eyes sharp. "Now, dear," she said to Sylvia, "show me the letter. We'll sort this out together." Her voice was kind, but her mind was cold, stitching together the manor's old secrets and this new danger. In her village, a threatening note once led to a hidden partner in crime, and she sensed the same here. Sylvia handed her the letter, its paper cheap, the words scrawled in black ink. "Leave the manor, or you'll join Vance. Roland didn't act alone. The truth stays buried." Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump, but her face stayed calm. The handwriting was rough, unlike Roland's neat script, and the mention of an accomplice was bold, like a St. Mary Mead thief, taunting the police. She tucked the letter into her handbag, her eyes scanning the family. Eleanor's hands shook. Charles's jaw tightened. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. Someone, she thought, knew more than they said. "It's frightening, dear," Miss Marple said to Sylvia, patting her hand. "But fear makes people careless, and that's how we'll catch them. Have you told Inspector Harrow?" Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp, watching for reactions. Sylvia nodded, her voice small. "He's coming tomorrow, but I'm scared, Miss Marple. What if they try again?" Her eyes flicked to Charles and Beatrice, then away, and Miss Marple noted it, her mind on the accusations that had once branded Sylvia a poisoner. "We'll keep you safe," Miss Marple said, her voice firm. "Now tell me about the box your father mentioned. Have you looked for it?" Her mind was on Reginald's journal, its hint of Clara's belongings hidden in the manor, proof of her life and perhaps a clue to the accomplice. Sylvia shook her head. Not yet. I've been too afraid to search with this letter. But Father said it was in the manor, somewhere safe. Her voice trembled and Eleanor spoke, her tone soft but strained. Reginald loved his secrets, Jane. He'd hide things in odd places, books, panels, even the garden. Her eyes darted to the window, where the rose garden glowed, and Miss Marple's heart quickened. The garden, she thought, might hold more than the journal. She turned to Charles and Beatrice, her voice gentle. You've been here longest. Any ideas where Reginald might hide a box? Her eyes watched their faces, looking for a flinch. Charles shrugged, his voice gruff. Father was always secretive. Could be anywhere. Attic, cellar, walls. Beatrice's lips thinned, her eyes cold. We've no time for treasure hunts. Miss Marple, Sylvia's in danger. Her tone was sharp, but her hands twitched, like a St. Mary Mead woman who'd hidden a stolen brooch. Thank you, dear, Miss Marple said, smiling. Every bit helps. But her mind was sharp, noting Beatrice's unease, Charles's vagueness, Eleanor's glance at the garden. Someone, she thought, knew about the box, or feared it. She decided to start in the library, where the hidden passage had been, its scratched table a clue to Reginald's habits. The library was quiet, the air heavy with dust and old books. Miss Marple tapped the walls, her knuckles soft, listening for a hollow sound. The passage's panel by the fireplace was sealed now, but the scratched table nagged at her. She knelt, her small frame steady, and checked under the table, her fingers finding a loose board. She pried it up, her heart jumping, as a small tin box emerged, its lid rusted but intact. Inside were papers, letters in Clara's handwriting, a photograph of her with baby Sylvia, and a note from Reginald. Keep these safe, for Sylvia's future. Miss Marple's mind raced. The box was proof of Clara's life. But why threaten Sylvia over it? In St. Mary Mead, hidden papers once revealed a blackmailer, and she sensed the same here. She tucked the box into her handbag, her face calm but her thoughts spinning. The threatening letter, the accomplice, the box. They pointed to someone protecting a secret, perhaps tied to Clara's scandal. She slipped outside, the rose garden bright, its wild corner neat but still whispering secrets. The fountain, where she'd found the locket, gleamed, and she paused, thinking of the note. The truth lies in the rose garden. The journal had been there, but was there more? Footsteps crunched behind her. Beatrice approached, her green dress sharp in the sunlight, her face tight. Miss Marple, she said, her voice cold. You're digging again. Sylvia's letter is probably a prank. Why stir things up? Her eyes were hard and Miss Marple smiled, her heart quick but her face mild. Just looking, dear, she said. Old gardens hold old truths, like a St. Mary Mead plot where a note led to a thief's partner. Her tone was light, but her eyes watched Beatrice's hands, which clenched like a village woman caught lying. Beatrice turned away, her steps quick, and Miss Marple noted it, her mind on the accomplice. Beatrice's unease, her quick dismissal of the letter, was a clue, like Roland's clean boots. She returned to the manor, finding Sylvia in the drawing room, her face pale but her eyes determined. Miss Marple, she said, I want to help. If there's someone else, we need to find them. Miss Marple nodded, her voice gentle. You're brave, dear. Let's show Inspector Harrow the box tomorrow. It might draw the shadow out. Her mind was on the trap that caught Roland, and she planned another, smaller one to flush out the accomplice. In her village, a second trap once caught a blackmailer, and she hoped it would work here. By evening, Eleanor served tea, the pot clean, the air softer. Charles and Beatrice were quiet, their eyes on Sylvia, who sat close to Miss Marple. The manor felt alive, but the threatening letter hung over them, a shadow not yet banished. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes on the rose garden, its wild corner a reminder of secrets past and present. The locket, the box, the letter, they were new threads in an old scarf. And the accomplice, was the needle. In St. Mary Mead, a partner's mistake once closed a case. Here, Miss Marple thought, it might do the same, if she could pull the right thread before the shadow struck again. Chapter 17. The Final Truth. The morning sun rose over Willow Manor, its golden rays warming the rose garden and banishing the last shadows of fear. Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing room, her small hands folded over her black handbag, her pink cardigan neat despite the weight of the past day's discoveries. Her sharp eyes, bright as ever, watched the family gather, their faces a mix of hope and lingering unease. The threatening letter slipped under Sylvia's door, hinting at Roland's accomplice, had reopened the case, and the tin box found under. The library table, filled with Clara's letters and a photograph, had deepened the mystery. Her handbag held the locket with Clara's image, the note reading, "The truth lies in the rose garden," the scrap with Sylvia's name, and now the threatening letter, its rough scrawl, a final clue. Miss Marple's imaginary knitting needles clicked, weaving the last threads. Roland's greed, Sylvia's parentage, Clara's survival, and an accomplice's hidden hand. In St. Mary Mead, a final trap always caught the guilty, and today she would set one to end Willow Manor's nightmare. The manor was quieter now, its halls free of the dread that had gripped it. Lady Eleanor Grayson sat by the fire, her silver, hair-pinned neatly, her handkerchief still but her eyes wary. Sylvia was beside her, her brown curls tidy, her face brave despite the letter's threat to leave or die. Charles paced near the window, his dark hair combed, his anger softened by Sylvia's innocence. Beatrice stood apart, her green dress sharp in the morning light, her eyes cold but her hands restless. Inspector Harrow and his constable waited in the library, ready for Miss Marple's signal. She had shared her plan with Harrow, announce the box's contents publicly, claiming they named Roland's accomplice to flush out the guilty. Her steps were soft but sure as she prepared, her mind sharp, thinking of the rose garden, the hidden passage, and the cyanide that had claimed Vance and nearly Beatrice. The drawing room was warm, the fire crackling, the air thick with anticipation. Miss Marple stood, her small frame steady, her handbag in her lap. "Thank you for gathering," she said, her voice gentle but clear. "Sylvia received a threatening letter, as you know, hinting at Roland's accomplice. Yesterday I found a box hidden in the library left by Sir Reginald. It holds Clara's letters, a photograph, and a note suggesting someone else knew Sylvia's parentage and helped Roland's crimes. I believe the accomplice is here, among us." Her eyes moved from face to face, soft but piercing like a St. Mary Mead neighbor spotting a liar. Eleanor gasped, her hands trembling. An accomplice? Jane, who could it be? Sylvia shrank back, her eyes wide, her hand clutching Eleanor's. Charles stopped pacing, his face pale. "That's absurd," he said, his voice gruff. "Roland acted alone, he confessed." Beatrice's lips thinned, her hands clenching, her eyes darting to the door. Miss Marple noted it, her heart quickening but her face calm. Beatrice's unease, like Roland's clean boots, was a clue, and the trap was set. "I'll read the note," Miss Marple said, pulling a paper from her handbag, not Reginald's, but a decoy she'd written to match his style. It says, "Clara's truth was known to another, who aided the poisoner to protect their share. The box names this person, and Inspector Harrow has it now." Her voice was steady, but her eyes watched Beatrice, whose face drained of color, her hands shaking. In her village, a trap like this had caught a blackmailer, and she sensed Beatrice was cracking. Beatrice stood, her voice sharp. "This is nonsense. There's no accomplice. Sylvia's stirring trouble to keep the manor." Her words were quick, her eyes wild, and Miss Marple saw the fear like a St. Mary Mead woman who'd hidden a theft. Sylvia shook her head, tears falling. "I didn't, Beatrice. I just want to be safe." Eleanor hugged her, her face pale but her eyes on Beatrice, suspicious now. Charles turned to Beatrice, his voice low. "What's got into you? You sound guilty." His eyes narrowed, and Beatrice stepped back, her hands raised. "Don't be ridiculous, Charles. I'm just tired of this." But her voice cracked, and Miss Marple nodded to Harrow, who entered with his constable, his gray mustache twitching, his notebook open. "Mrs. Beatrice Grayson," Harrow said, his voice gruff. "We found a bottle of ink in your room, matching the letters, and a maid saw you near Sylvia's door 2 nights ago. Care to explain?" His eyes were hard and Beatrice froze, her face crumpling, her hands falling to her sides. "All right," she spat, her voice low, her eyes cold. "I helped Roland. He promised me half the estate if Sylvia was out of the way. I wrote the letter, to scare her off thinking she'd run. I didn't poison anyone, Roland did that, but I knew about the cyanide. Showed him where Reginald kept it in the cellar. I thought we'd be rich." Her words were bitter, like a St. Mary Mead confession. From a greedy sister. Charles stared, his face pale, his anger turning to shock. Sylvia sobbed, Eleanor holding her tight. Miss Marple spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "You wanted the manor, dear, like Roland. But secrets don't stay buried. Not in a house like this." The rose garden note led to Reginald's journal, the locket to Clara's truth, and your letter to you. Her eyes were sharp, tying the clues, the passage, the locket, the box, the letter into a neat scarf. In her village, a partner's greed once closed a case, and here Beatrice's had done the same. Harrow cuffed Beatrice, her protests fading as the constable led her away. Charles sank into a chair, his face in his hands. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I should have seen it." Eleanor hugged Sylvia, her voice soft. "It's over now, dear. You're safe." Sylvia nodded, her tears slowing, her face brave. Miss Marple sat, her handbag lighter now, the threatening letter's shadow gone. "Families heal, dear," she said to Sylvia, patting her hand. "Clara's waiting for you, and the manor's yours to mend." Her mind was on the box, its letters proof of Clara's love, and the journal, Reginald's gift. The rose garden, she thought, had kept its promise, revealing the truth. The next day, Sylvia left for Devon, escorted by Eleanor to meet Clara. Miss Marple watched them go, her heart warm, but her thoughts drifting to St. Mary Mead. Charles stayed, to manage the manor, his guilt turning to resolve. The box's contents were shared with Sylvia, her mother's letters a treasure to carry forward. Miss Marple packed her knitting, her needle still, and boarded the train home, the manor's stone walls fading in the dusk. In St. Mary Mead, her cottage welcomed her, its garden blooming, its quiet a balm. She sat by her fire, the locket and, note in a drawer, mementos of a case closed. The manor's secrets, Clara's survival, Sylvia's parentage, Roland's greed, Beatrice's betrayal, were threads tied off, the scarf complete. In her village, a case's end brought peace, but Miss Marple's sharp eyes stayed bright, ready for the next thread to unravel.